So it is 7 o'clock, November 2nd, 2021. I call this meeting of the Wellfleet Select Board to order in accordance with the temporary suspension and enhancement of the open meeting law as allowed by the General Court of the Commonwealth. First item on the agenda is announcements, open sessions, and public comments. Please note that public comments must be brief and the board will not deliberate or vote on any matter raised solely during announcements and public comments. Does anybody have one?
I do, Ryan.
Okay,
I just wanted to mention that after this next Sunday, we go off of daylight savings times, and we usually go back to 6 o'clock meetings rather than 7 p.m. meetings. So I don't know if you want to vote on that or something, but we can't now. But just a reminder that we would do it next week.
Yeah, it's already.
I mean, I think it's on the schedule, but we're not going to discuss it, just to bring it to your attention. It should be on the schedule that's been made up.
Yep. Okay. Any others? Okay. So moving on, there's nothing on the consent agenda tonight. So I'm moving to open the public hearing, which is. Okay, 1 second, sorry. Wellfleet Select Board will now hold a virtual public hearing on the issue of allocating the local property tax levy among 5 classes for fiscal year 2020, Chapter 40, Section 56, as amended by Chapter 369 of the Acts of 1982. So Charlie or Nancy, who should I call on here?
Hi, Ryan. I think, well, I was going to say, I think I'd like to have suggest that Nancy go through her memo in the process. And then afterwards, I'd like to talk about the bigger picture, if that's okay.
Yes. So Nancy?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay.
Okay, this is our, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay. This is our annual hearing where the select board needs to decide how they are going to divide the tax burden among the 5 classes of property, which are residential, open space, commercial, industrial, and personal property. So the first order of business is for the board to decide if they would like to shift the tax burden from equally among all taxpayers to the commercial side, where commercial would pay more and residential would pay less. We have never yet shifted the burden to commercial because our commercial is so small. So if you would like to keep the same tax rate for commercial and residential, I will need to have a motion as printed in my memo.
Okay. Is that to retain a single tax rate?
Yes.
Okay. Are there any questions first before we make a question? Janet?
No, I was going to make a motion.
Okay. So I move to retain the single tax rate to make the residential factor the numeral 1 for fiscal year 2022.
Ellen, second.
So a question, you're using the different verbiage than Nancy did. So this is to keep it the same, to keep the commercial the same as the residential. That's what Nancy was first presenting.
Yes.
Okay.
That's the correct. That's the
That's
motion in her
correct.
memo.
Okay. All right.
Right, Nancy?
Yes, that's correct. You got it
Okay.
correctly.
Okay.
John?
Yeah, I figured I'd better ask this question now before we get to the part dealing with non-resident taxpayers. It only just occurred to me, so I apologize, but in addition to the fact that I am a homeowner and a year-round resident, together with my brothers, we own a property that came to us from our parents, and they are not year-round residents. And I'm wondering if I need to recuse myself.
Mm,
I don't think on this particular question.
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead, Mike.
John, it's up to you, but you wouldn't need to, because this isn't about residential or resident and non-resident. This is just about the tax rate for commercial and residential property. And this wouldn't have an impact on non-residents any more than anything else.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think he's more concerned about the following
Yeah.
ones.
Yeah.
Yeah, the following, I probably need to recuse.
Okay. So in the future, the best thing to do is call the
The lawyer.
attorney of the day,
Yeah.
and double check with them. So Helen?
Yeah, two things. One is through you to Nancy Vale. Isn't it more specific than just moving to stick with option one? Doesn't that cover everything, not just the commercial? Shouldn't we have made the motion specific just to commercial?
No, so I move that,
I'm calling,
keep-
asking Nancy.
yep, so I move to retain the single tax rate and to make the residential factor the numeral 1 for fiscal year 2022.
Does that cover commercial is my question to
Yes.
Nancy Vale.
So Nancy, if you may.
Yes, this is just, this one option we're talking about right now is, do you want to have the same tax rate for commercial and residential, or do you want to shift more of the burden to commercial?
Thank you for making that completely clear. And the second thing I wanted to say is to John, such a high percentage, way over 10% of the town is affected by the exemption vote, that I think you're safe. I would not, in your position myself, recuse, given that you have disclosed your status. That's just me. Thank you.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Okay, any other comments? Okay, can I have a, was the motion seconded?
Yes,
Yeah.
it was.
Okay, can I have a roll call vote?
Janet, I.
John, I.
Michael, aye.
Ryan, I.
Oh, and I.
Okay, motion carries 5-0. Onto the residential exemptions.
Now, would you like to go through option 2 and 3 first? Because those generally involve very little discussion, and
Okay,
option 1 is a much longer discussion, so maybe we can dispense with those other 2 first, if you would like to do that.
yes, please. So option 2 is an open space exemption.
Correct.
So Nancy, go ahead.
So this would provide an exemption for those providing open space. Right now, everything we have that would fit into that category is basically, most of it is tax exempt anyways. It's Wellfleet Conservation Trust, it's Audubon Society, it's Town of Wellfleet Conservation Commission, it's National Seashore. There is also available to people who put a tax deduction for people who put a conservation restriction on their property. So they're already, the taxable people that have agreed to provide open space are already receiving a tax deduction.
Okay, is there any discussion on this? Okay, so I move not to have a open space exemption.
Second,
Roll call vote.
Janet, I.
John, I.
Michael, aye.
Ryan, I.
Oh, and I.
Okay. Small business exemption, Nancy.
As you can see, an amount up to 10% of the assessed value of a small business with less than 10 year-round employees, an assessed valuation of $1 million could be voted. Almost all of our businesses are small, And it would shift the burden to just a few businesses, probably like maybe the movie theater in Cumberland Farms. And I know a past town administrator had done a calculation and he said the deduction would be like enough to buy a pizza. So it's really, I mean, most everybody's a small business, so I don't really think this is an option for us.
Okay.
Okay, any discussion on this?
No,
Nope.
Okay. So I move not to have a small business exemption for fiscal year 2022.
Helen, second.
Roll call vote, please.
Janet, I.
John, I.
Michael, I.
Ryan, I. Helen?
Oh, Helen, I, sorry.
Okay, motion carries 5-0. Back to the residential tax exemption.
Okay, Ryan, I'm going to recuse.
Okay,
Okay, so there is a residential exemption available to those people who are domiciled in Wellfleet. How it's calculated is you find the assessed value of the entire residential class, which is single families, condos, 2 families, 3 families, 4 families, vacant land, mixed use. So you find the average of that, and then the board can vote to exempt up to 35% of that average assessed value, which is then subtracted from qualifying taxpayers' assessments, and then they are taxed on the balance. So we began this program in fiscal 19, and the board has voted to go with the 20%, which used to be the maximum until the Municipal Modernization Act of several years ago extended the ceiling up to 35%. So I've provided you with some supplemental materials here to show you the effect of the residential exemption. So my first paper was fiscal 21 last year, so that you could see what you voted, which you selected the 20%, and there were 740 qualifying properties, and the exemption was $111,647,000, which is the equivalent of $877.54 in tax dollars. So the next page proposed for fiscal 22, if you choose to stay with the exemption, with the 20% exemption, it would the exemption would go up to 125,943, and we have an increase of, I believe it's 14 new exemptions for a total of 754. I do anticipate that we will get some more applications in the course of the year, because people can file up until April 1st of 2022.
Okay.
So the average residential value last year was $558,234. This year it's up to $629,717, and that accounts for the increase from $111,647 up to $125,943. So for this year, if you stuck with the 20%, we would be exempting 12,342,000 and change more than we exempted last year. Now, that exemption needs to be made up. We can't do without that money. So effectively, the exemption raises the tax rate for all residential taxpayers, not just the ones that are getting the exemption, but all residential taxpayers. So in effect, even though you just voted not to split the rate, it does split the rate, because the exemption only applies to the residential class. So then your third piece of paper here, another scenario for fiscal 22, is if you raise the exemption to 25%. I know there's been discussion in past classification hearings of raising the percentage over 20%. So at a 25% exemption, it would go up to 157,429, exempting 118,701 and change. So that would be $23 million of value over exempted over what the 20% exemption is, and it would be $36 million of value exempted over the FY21 exempted amount. So we did have a board of assessors meeting this morning, and in as much as we are not supposed to make a recommendation, we're simply supposed to supply the board with all the information it needs to make a decision. It was the feeling of the board that because we have not completed our forensic accounting and because the real estate market is so crazy right now, we thought it might be imprudent for FY22 to raise that exemption higher than 20%. The feeling was, let's see the results of our accounting and let's see what shakes out in the real estate market and look at it again this year. We thought it might be imprudent to exempt that much more value when we don't even know what our tax rate is. And I can just say anecdotally, I did speak to the assessor in Truro last week, and they went from 20% to 25%, and their tax rate went up 36 cents. Like 95% of the increase was due to the increase in the residential exemption.
So before we continue, do we know what the status is of the expanded residential tax exemption that was asked for at town meeting?
I do not, and I do know that Truro had put in for it, I believe, last year before COVID came, and that kind of sidetracked the legislature a little bit, and they don't expect theirs to be approved or for it to come up until, this legislative session or possibly the next.
Okay. So I'd like to open it to questions right now. Are there any from the board? Go ahead, Mike.
Nancy, what is the sort of effect on, I know it's probably kind of difficult to calculate completely, the actual cumulative tax increase on a median home of a non-resident if the residential exception were to go up to 25%? Do you know like how many hundreds of dollars it would be a year? Or would it be even $100 a year that would shift to
Well,
non-resident?
That I do not know. It raises the tax rate for all residential properties the same. You would pay, like this year, the residential rate is $786. You pay $786 per thousand, and a non-resident pays $786 per thousand, but they don't get the benefit of that deduction of $111,000 for from their assessment.
Right. I guess what I'm kind of getting at is that I don't think that the burden per year per median home price is very much because it's split over the 4,200 parcels or something like that, or something like 3,500 parcels or something like that. But I don't know. I don't know what the total. I think what we were looking at before was something around a few $100s a year that would be a difference for non-resident homeowners. Their increase is a few $100s a year winds up saving resident homeowners a substantial amount on a median home.
Right. It just is a matter of how much all that of the exempted valuation causes the tax rate, the dollars per thousand, to go up. And we're not far along enough in our accounting for me to be able to say what that would be.
Right. Okay.
Okay. So according to your numbers right now, about 17% of the residential properties are full-time, are full-time or domiciles.
Yeah.
The remaining 83% is seasonal. I don't really understand what the Board of Assessors thinking might be in terms of reducing the tax burden to the residents of the town, especially if our finances are uncertain and maybe higher than expected. It would seem to me that we would want to limit the increase of their tax rates as much as we possibly can. I mean, I would be for 25% right now. If we have an expanded residential tax exemption, I would be for 35 to reduce it as much as we can to the people that live here. The overall median income has been declining and not increasing. The valuations on the homes are getting extremely high. They increased by how much?
70%.
No, they increased by 12.8%. At least the assessed value on the median sale price in the last year. I think it's over 800,000 for the town of Wellfleet now for the median house. But that's just me. So Helen?
Yeah, a couple things. Nancy described Truro. Well, Eastham has talked about this for years, but they have yet to agree on having a residential exemption. Remember, it's not for all residents. It's for only the people that apply for exemptions, which I at no point would be willing to do for myself. But the other thing, the reason I have, except for last year, voted to keep it all the same is there is no way, and I reconfirmed this with Nancy today, there is no way to know what somebody's income is. If we could do this in relation to somebody's income, that would be great. We do have ways for people who are truly have less money to get abatements, to apply for rental assistance, and which can help when landlords raise rents, property owners, and so forth. And I think that given we can't get up in people's business, we don't know how little money our non-residential people have, and we don't know how much money our residential people have, and we never will. I think that we should just have it be all equal with no tax exemption, because everybody's taxes goes up, as two other people have already said. And that would be, to my mind, the fair way to do it.
Okay,
yeah.
1 second, Nancy. To the effect of Helen's question, does the overall tax burden to a house receiving an expanded resident or receiving a residential tax exemption, does the overall payment that those residents have to make go up?
Well, it's all gonna depend on how our accounting turns out, how our so-called recap comes out. We did vote pretty much everything at town meeting. And there's just really no knowing until we're able to set a rate.
Let me rephrase that.
Well, the exempted value has to get made up by everybody in the residential class. So without the exemption, well, who knows without the exemption, but that money has to get made up. So it is going to raise the tax rate for all residential people. And it's just that, okay, you might, maybe your bill is going to go up $500 because of the exemption, but you get to subtract off that $877. So effectively, the residents' bills are lower.
Yes.
That's
So
unbelievable.
not everybody's rate goes up effectively in terms of
Well,
what they're paying
everyone's
the town.
tax dollars per thousand is going to go up, but that doesn't mean their bill is going to go up.
Yeah, after you average it out to a year-round resident, claiming a domiciled status, their overall rate, effective tax rate would be lower with a residential exemption.
The tax rate, the dollars per
The
thousand is the same,
effective,
but
Nancy, the effective rate, not the overall rate, the rate
Right.
that they're paying.
so,
Yes.
yeah, because you get to subtract $877 off your bill.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's definitely gonna be lower unless your value went up astronomically.
Right.
Where even though that you were able to save $877, you still had a bigger tax bill because your value went up so much more.
Okay, Mike?
Yeah, I was just gonna to state the same thing, that the effective tax rate or the burden on a resident would be higher without the exemption. I mean,
Of course,
if you take the exemption away, the effective rate on a resident will be higher. So to do what Helen's suggesting and eliminating this exemption right now would effectively raise the tax rate on residents quite a bit because they've been receiving an exemption for years. So you'd be essentially raising that tax back up plus whatever it goes up this year. So I'd be in favor of Ryan's suggestion of bringing it up to 25%. I don't think the shift of the burden is that great because of the fact that non-resident properties make up the majority of the town by quite a bit. So the actual effective tax burden is not increased that much. And the difference that it makes to residents who live here, who, you know, go through the winter, there is a actual, the residents are not the driver of increased values, right? And then there's also, we are not in an area where we can compete with wages and earnings as people who can potentially come and buy second homes. And the fact of the matter is that if you don't live in your home, it's a second home, which puts you at least asset advantage compared to you know, some people. And no, we can't means test it, but there's some sacrifice you make to live out here year round, regardless of the fact that some people may think it's paradise. It can be a difficult place to live. And with rising real estate costs, rising expenses and housing issues, I think it's important that, you know, residents are not having their taxes increased, particularly by eliminating this exemption at this point, which would change the effective rate quite a bit. So I'm in favor of increasing it to 25% at this point.
Okay, Helen?
It's only residents that apply for the exemption. This year, Nancy gave me a number which was 754 about. All the other residents, like myself, are going to have their taxes go up. Fair enough. But the other thing is, one of the interesting things is it's very hard to calculate what our actual resident, non-resident taxpayer percentage is. The closest Nancy could get, and she went in minute detail over how she calculated this repeatedly, is that it's about 52% to 48%, Mike. It's not like a whole lot more second homeowners. Or people who aren't, wait, or who people who
All
aren't
right,
claiming
all right.
residency. And then I need to say one more
So
thing.
point of order, Helen,
One more fact.
no, you're
Only
you're
takes
not even,
184 days to claim
All right.
domicile.
so effective immediately, I don't know, you have to be recognized and you have to, when I say it's a point of order, you need to cease at that point.
And you need to let me finish my sentence.
So Janet?
So I was gonna say that I am for this. We go through the same discussion for the last 3 years. We kind of should know about it by now. I guess I would, just to feel complete with this, ask Charlie if he feels with our money situation, with our finances, if he has a feeling of having it being 25% or 30 or 35%, but I don't want to put you on the spot either.
Yeah, Ryan, is it okay for me to respond?
Yep.
Oh, yeah, through you.
Yeah, no, I don't mind you putting me on the spot, Val. I've already talked to Ryan today. I do need to talk to the board after this element about a number of issues going up, but I will tell you, I think a transition towards a higher residential exemption makes sense. And I think going from 20 to 25 cents is logical. And I will tell you, in the past, I made recommendations against this very program in Brewster many years ago. But when I see what's going on with property values and what it's doing to our ability to retain year-round populations, this is the tool to deal with that. So
Yeah.
I applaud for you for dealing with this issue in the past. And I think this is a good incremental step.
Thank you.
So, and to correct my point of order, it should have been point of fact, which is in Robert's Rules of Order, Helen. I can see you. According to the memo that Nancy provided us, it wasn't 50% of the residential houses that are year-round residents, it's 17%. And frankly, if a board member decides not to claim the domicile exemption, that's entirely their choice. And you should allow the other members of the community to make their choice as well. So on that, I would like to call the question.
So excuse me, Mr. Chair, but Nancy has her hand up again.
I would like to just call the question
Okay.
at this point.
I would like to hear from Nancy.
No,
I think we've got it figured out
Yep.
with Nancy's help too. So Ryan, do you want to make the motion? If you get the
I move to set the Wellfleet residential tax exemption at an amount of 25% of the average assessment for the entire residential class for the fiscal year 2022.
Second,
Okay, roll call vote.
For the sake of discussion, I'd like to hear
No.
from
Roll call vote.
Janet, I.
Michael, aye.
Ryan, I. Ellen,
Ellen May.
motion carries 3-0.
John
Um,
recused.
Yep, I know,
Yep.
sorry.
So on to, and John, you can come back now. So Charlie,
Okay, thank you, everyone. And I'm going to be relatively brief tonight. And Ryan does know I'm on vacation down in Maryland visiting my family, but I wanted to participate in this element. I'll leave afterwards. It's not that I don't care. But so I just wanted to let you know about that. But I wanted to talk about where we are today. So it has a relationship to the tax classification hearing that's on the agenda. As I've been talking to you for a long time, I had originally asked the board to establish a placeholder for a special town meeting in December because I've been concerned about the ability to establish a tax rate based upon the spending plan that was approved at the June 26, 2021 annual town meeting. Now, as I mentioned last week, we haven't made the progress that we had hoped to make. And it would be fair to say that we're 4 or 5 weeks behind where I had hoped to be at this point. I mentioned that last week. It's a overwhelming problem and issues we're dealing with. We have a good team. I'm not talking about me. I'm talking about Lisa and Mary in particular. But these problems are significant and a bit overwhelming even for us. I had told you last week that we were going to have the Department of Revenue in Town Hall today. We did. We're very grateful that they spent the whole day there working with Lisa and Mary. And we've been trying to populate the portal in the state's gateway system to set the tax rate. And we've had great cooperation from all of our financial staff. Nancy is on the call. Thank you. She's done a lot of great work here. But what we've come to realize as of today is what I've been worrying about all along, is the spending plan that was approved at the June 26th annual town meeting is higher than our availability of funds. I suspect it's no great surprise to anybody here. But these stubborn problems that we've been trying to deal with over the last 2 fiscal years have really made this an arduous journey. We're not done yet. So I called Ryan today after Lisa and Mary met with the Department of Revenue, and they called me down here in Maryland at the end of the business day, and we went through a few issues. Now, we still have some more work to do over the next couple of days, but it's quite clear to me that we will not be able to set a tax rate until we deal with the deficit that we have in the current funding plan. Now, I do have a sense of what that number is, but until I can get through the rest of this week and work with Lisa and Mary and the state, I'd like to keep it in a very generalized term. So we will have to delay setting of the tax rate. We're going to have a special town meeting before we can set the tax rate. We have a lot of work to do to kind of get to a place where we can say to you, this is what we need to either cut in spending or use other revenues, which we don't have a lot of, or we need an override. So, you know, it's really distressing to me to talk to you about it. But I'll be honest with you and tell you I've been feeling we were going to end up here for a while. So I talked to Ryan today, and my thinking is we'll keep working on this towards the rest of the week. We'll have an agenda item on with your collective permission, next Tuesday to give you some more details in the essence of a plan. I have a lot more work to do. And I'm trying to take some time off this week with my family. I haven't taken too much off, but tomorrow I am going to do that. So that's the story right now. Now, we still haven't closed FY20. We still haven't closed FY21. We're making progress. So my goal is, as we get through the middle of December, that we'll be closing in on that. And then we can, know what we might have available for free cash to deal with some of the issues we're dealing with. But in the end, there is an absolute need to call a special town meeting sometime in January. Now, that'll mean we're going to have some cash flow issues, right? We're not going to get our tax bills out this fall. That revenue is important to our cash flow. So we'll analyze that too. It'll probably suggest that we're going to need a revenue and anticipation note, a temporary borrowing. So, the pain continues, but if we can keep this course, we'll get to a better place. And, we're committed to helping Wellfleet get through this, but we've got a lot of work to do. So thank you, Ryan.
Okay. Are there questions? Okay, I don't see anybody. Oh, Helen. Helen?
Two things, Charlie, thank you for sharing that information with us. It wasn't on the agenda, so I felt uncomfortable about it, but this is breaking news. It's not an emergency, but it's breaking news. And thank you for taking time off of your vacation to tell us about it. I would have preferred it to be in a memorandum to all of us so that it wasn't during a meeting with no agenda item. Thank you.
It's part of the tax classification and why we were not setting the tax rate tonight.
Yeah, and I would like to clarify that. I did talk to Ryan today. And, you know, it's a direct correlation to the classification hearing, the tax rate process. Otherwise, I wouldn't have brought it up tonight.
Are there any questions from the board at this time or
No.
members of the public? We are in a public hearing, so Mike,
Yeah, Charlie, do we know when you think offhand a special town meeting would be likely to occur at this point?
You know, I think that the Department of Revenue is going to continue to work with us this week. I'm going to push to know those final deficiency issues that we're dealing with by the end of the week or Monday. And then I'm gonna have, when I come, I'll be back Monday in Wellfleet. And then my goal is to be able to establish a date before Tuesday night.
Okay. And
Because
just
time is of the essence.
I guess my other question is just if we feel like we need more resources in the accounting department right now, or are we?
Yeah. Well, as you might recall, we do have a situation where we have someone out in totally appropriate authorized leave. And I've added a third person, Judy Sprague, who's starting this week. So she'll take some of that pressure off. And she'll be doing payroll and accounts payable. And so that Lisa's not doing two jobs. So I think with Mary McIsaac, Lisa Sylvie, Judy Sprague, we'll get there. It's a good team, as you well know.
Okay, thanks, Charlie.
Ken and Kathy Granlund. And then,
Hi, thanks. It's Kathy Granlund. Thanks
Yeah.
for recognizing me. I'm sorry I was jumping in and out of the meeting, but I just had a quick question as I jumped back in. Charlie, do you think in anticipation and in abundance of caution that it is necessary to look at any short-term borrowing at this point?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Kathy. Yeah, Mary McIsaac will work with Miriam Spencer, our town treasurer, but the answer is most likely yes.
Okay, thank you.
okay. Helen,
Yes, having listened to people, and this is still a hearing, may we please hear from Nancy what she was going to say before, which I'm sure is germane.
no, we've moved on, Helen.
No, we're still in the hearing. You just
We're in
said,
the hearing, yes, but
why should we not hear from the assessor? Please, if she still wishes to say.
Helen,
Helen, all right,
it's not going to be anything really new that
How do you
don't
know?
already know. Because I
okay,
kind of know, you know? You
all right.
get that
So-
going.
I move to close the public hearing at this time. Or I close this public hearing at this time. Onto wastewater.
And I'm gonna leave you.
Yep.
And Ryan, I will just say on the wastewater issue, I did meet with Kurt and Scott and Hillary today, and we had a nice conversation. But I'll leave, and we'll be together next week.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Charlie.
Thank you.
Okay. So Kurt or Scott, who should I call on here first? So you, Scott? Okay. So financing.
Okay, Ryan, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, so it's up to you, Ryan, but I did send a 2-page summary of financing options to the town. I could walk you through that if you'd like, or simply take questions on that agenda item.
That was in the packet, Ryan?
Yes, the financing.
Yep.
Um,
And as Charlie mentioned, we did go through this with him today, and but happy to either walk through it or take questions, whatever your preference is.
walk us through it, please.
Okay, why don't I share my screen? I'll just put the document up there. I think might be the easiest way. So if you can see that, first, I guess what I'll say is I've formatted this based upon the information provided in the in town of Barnstable's CWMP in terms of financing options that are out there, and the numbering of this would be to be added to the existing report. So I'll just quickly walk through each of these options, and then we can certainly take questions and discussion. And Kurt may have comments to add to this as well, because I said we discussed this in detail earlier today. So the first one on here is the so-called short-term rental tax. This is what people are referring to, the Airbnb tax. We discussed these revenues here that would be estimates, approximately $1 million a year. The town of Wellfleet did raise the tax rate from 4% to 6% at the most recent town meeting, which would, by my understanding of what Charlie and others believe, that this $1 million per year is an approximate amount. I know that, or I believe I've heard that there's been previous discussions about how this money might get used. I know the housing people in town are interested in this revenue, as I'm sure others are. So that splitting of the money or allocation of the money would be entirely up to you to decide. We did discuss that today, and perhaps some sharing between housing and wastewater might be an option. So I'll just leave that at that. We can come back to it and I'll continue, if that's okay.
1 second before we continue.
Sure, sure.
So just, I'm not sure if you're you might be. So the way the town receives those funds, there was already the hotel motel rooms tax. So we don't receive a separate payment for the short-term rental tax. We receive it as one lump sum without a breakdown in short-term rentals versus the pre-existing rooms tax. So the pre-existing rooms tax was already part of Wellfleet's general operating budget.
Okay.
Yeah, Ryan, if I might.
Yep.
So we did discuss that with Charlie today, and he's working on looking at what FY 2019 revenues were, which would be just the hotel motel tax versus the FY 2020, which is a blend. FY 2021 has the full 4%, and FY 2022 will have obviously the 6% plus, plus the meals tax. So we are trying to disaggregate that, and Charlie did mention that.
Okay. Go ahead, Scott.
Okay, so the next one is the Cape and Islands Water Protection Fund. This is what some people, I think in your email, Ryan, refer to as loan forgiveness. So there's now a fund that is estimated the amount of $18 million annually that the town can apply for once they get a plan approved by Mass DEP and apply to the SRF program. And I think the $400,000 number is an estimate as to what Wellfleet's portion of that generates. But my understanding is that, the allocations are made by the Cape and Islands Protection Fund, and what comes back to the town is based upon whatever that group decides.
So there's some additional bits on this. I don't know. Is Andrew Gottlieb on here? Andrew?
He's here.
Yep, he has his hand up. Give
Okay.
Rebecca a second.
There he is. Okay.
Okay, you're good
Thanks.
to go,
Yeah.
Andrew.
I wasn't allowed to unmute myself. Somebody needs to tell me how to do that when I'm running one of these. So the way the Cape and Islands Water Protection Trust works is, as Scott rightly stated, the money comes back to towns in the form of principal subsidies on SRF loans. So translating that the other way, it means you have to get a SRF loan from the Clean Water Trust in order to obtain financing from the Water Protection Trust Fund. And the trust fund has established regulations that provide for 25% subsidy of the principal on a loan in excess of $1 million and 50% on a loan $1 million or less. So there's pretty good certainty, because it's been established by regulation, what the subsidy rate will be depending on what size project the town would be looking to get financed. So you'll know, now that if you apply and obtain a loan, what the subsidy rate will be. It's not up to the whims of the board on a year-to-year basis. There's been fairly detailed analysis of the cash flow coming into the trust fund and what the outflow will be, and the board felt comfortable establishing a regulatory 25 and 50% subsidy rates based on project size.
Kurt?
Can I just ask a question, Andrew? Between the short-term rental tax funds and the Cape and Islands Water Protection Fund, what I'm curious about is your perspective on which of these, if either or both, would ideally be used for capital versus O&M, or if they're both, if both can be used for capital and O&M. What's sort of your perspective on that?
Scott? Or not
Mr. Chair,
Scott, Andrew. Yep.
Should I respond?
Yes.
So the Water Protection Fund, because it is linked to SRF loans, is strictly for capital construction programs. You cannot get an SRF loan for operations and maintenance expenses. So therefore, by extension, those Cape and Island Water Protection Trust Fund dollars cannot be used to subsidize operational costs. In terms of the short-term rental tax, it's entirely up to the discretion of the municipality how it wants to apply those funds. And the experience across the Cape is varied. More than half the towns have set up a process through town meetings whereby a percentage from 50% to as much as 100% of the local proceeds from the aggregated short-term rental tax, not just the homestays, but the hotel motel as well, are directed to offset wastewater capital costs. You could choose to let it go into your general fund. You could choose to use it as an offset for operations and maintenance. That's entirely up to the community's discretion.
Okay. Are there any other questions on this? Okay, so Scott?
Okay, so the next one is a stabilization fund. My understanding from talking with Charlie today that the town does have several of these for various purposes, but the idea here would be to establish one specifically for the wastewater program. The town of Barnstable, as an example, has this, and I believe several other Cape towns do as well. So that's the only point here, the possibility of setting up a fund for those have dedicated money available for going forward.
Mr. Chair, if I might on that, just a nuance. Yes. If you set up that stabilization fund, you direct by state law, you direct a percentage of your hotel motel receipts into that stabilization fund. In order for them to come out for the stated purpose for which the fund was established, it requires a 2/3 vote of town meeting, and you are prevented from changing the percentage of funds that you allocate to that fund for 3 years from the time you set the number. So if you're gonna use this as a vehicle to set aside money for future wastewater infrastructure or any other way, any other purpose, give a lot of thought to how much of that money is a percentage of what you expect to come in, because you're going to live with that decision for 3 years.
Yep. Okay. Any questions? Okay. Seeing none, on to sewer assessments. Oh,
Yep,
and
okay.
actually, I had one before we advance.
Sure.
Stabilization Fund, you referenced this new revenue. Which new revenue are you referring to?
Well, I guess I was referring to specifically the short-term rental tax as one
Okay.
possibility, but I believe this could come from other sources as well. And again, I defer to Andrew on this if he wants to further clarify.
Yeah, you can allocate any revenue stream you want to it. You could, if you wanted to, you like my town Mashpee, we have some money coming in for associated with marijuana sales. You could tag that as well. You could tag a chunk of your restaurant meals tax to it. Anything that's coming in from the outside through DOR, you can route right into that fund without further appropriation.
Yep. Okay. Sewer assessments.
Okay, so this is, I guess, somewhat of a traditional approach to funding sewer infrastructure in terms of assessing fees to people who are connected to the system. I don't know, I've asked Patty Daly at the commission to look into this a little bit to see if this money, these assessments could be applied to other portions of the program, such as the septic INAs that we're talking about. So I don't know the answer to that yet, but this is something that has been used, I think, quite commonly by towns as a way of generating revenue for or payment for traditional sewer systems.
Okay. Can you scroll down to the next page?
Sure.
Okay. Just the top paragraph. So what section under chapter 83? Do you know?
I don't know.
Okay. And is the assessment attached to the property or the property owner at the time of the assessment?
Lien on the property.
On the property? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. That
And
makes
to
sense.
answer Scott's earlier question, in order to assess a betterment, you have to have an
Yeah.
associated public expenditure with it. So if you're going to apply it to IAs, you'd have to pay, the town would have to pay the cost of the IA system in order to associate it with the property for betterment purposes. If it's a private expense, you can't spread it out that way.
Okay. Mike, you're muted.
This is just a general question about financing enhanced INAs. If we were to come up with some sort of subsidy program for people to convert to enhanced INAs, as far as financing that, is that something that we could set up a program for subsidizing the cost of these, similar to a sewer assessment, and apply for water protection funds under capital as a capital cost?
Andrew, can you answer that?
Yeah, you would, if you applied for funding from the SRF for public investment in alternative systems, it would then and only then become eligible for funding under the Clean Water, the Cape and Islands Water Protection Trust. There is another avenue that's being evaluated now, whereby the existing community septic management program, which provides funding support, all of the 15 towns participate in that program. It's administered on our individual behalf by the county. there's ongoing discussion about expanding that program, and it is an arm of the SRF. So one of the sort of legal finance questions that remains unresolved to date is, if you expanded that program, could you link it sufficiently to the language that authorized the trust fund to make it eligible? And so I think it's the best way I could characterize the answer to your question is it's being looked at. There's no clean mechanism right now through that program, but if a town wanted to get an SRF loan to fund IA systems, it would by definition become eligible for Cape and Islands subsidy.
Okay.
Okay, Fred McGee.
Hi. The term betterment was used a few moments ago, and on the assumption that this is the other end of the water enterprise system, water out, water in. On the sewer, there's been reluctance over the years, and I mean 6-7 years that I can recall, to apply any sort of betterment tax or subsidy on the system on people who benefit from having proximity to the water, the hydrants and so on. Is something different here? Is there a sense that this sort of assessment could be applicable here and acceptable here, where historically it hasn't been on the other end of the water line?
Scott or Kurt, please.
Yeah,
I'm not sure I can answer that. Go ahead, Kurt.
yeah, I think the answer is yes. I mean, these are topics that Nate Keenan, who's the director of the SRF program for the Commonwealth, is looking at. In addition to that, we had a fairly good conversation with him a little bit ago, and he's working on the legal language such that SRF funds could be used for an enhanced septic program. He said they could be used for PRBs. They clearly could be used for the 95 Lawrence Road project. The former two programs need some additional legal language for the contracting to be put in place. But generally speaking, I think the Commonwealth is looking to figure out how to make those things happen.
Okay, I would add that one difference between the water system, which the model isn't great right now, is the scale of the application in terms of because it would apply to a large amount of the town. So Kathy Granlund, sorry.
Thanks, Ryan. So strictly from a financing standpoint, we've talked about in these the short presentation, we talked about motel revenue, marijuana revenue, short-term rental revenue, and meals tax revenue, all going to support the water system. And I agree that water and a healthy environment is something that we want to see going forward. But when I look at 4 sources of revenue that have been mentioned in this, my concern is that how does the rest of the town function around this these funding sources when you're pulling from all of these different revenue streams? And the short-term rental, as I understand, has already been promised to something. So I just want to make sure that we are not earmarking revenues 2 and 3 times over to support something. So I'd like to see a more detailed revenue plan when it comes to prioritizing what the town needs to do, short-term and long-term.
Scott or Kurt?
Yeah, these great question. I mean, Scott, you're more than welcome to jump in there, but the intention here is to lay out options. These aren't suggestions or demands. They're really just kind of laying out the framework around which wastewater infrastructure has been financed, in many communities across the Commonwealth. And it's really up to the Board of Selectmen, committee members, the Finance Committee, lots of discussions among town officials, as well as Charlie and administration, to try to figure out what the best avenues are for any of these different programs. Each program that's part of the comprehensive, wastewater plan, or the watershed plan that Scott's prepared that's now in draft form, any of those features, any of those programs potentially can access different kinds of financing sources. And so what we're trying to do is lay out the fact that, yes, this is a little complicated because certain sources can be used for one program and not another. At the same time, kind of lay those out and try to create that financial roadmap that you're looking for that would make sense. And clearly there are lots of other needs within the town. So I want to be very, very clear. We're not suggesting that each of these be dedicated specifically to water and wastewater. It's really just a series of options.
Okay. Andrew?
Yeah, just to try and bring it back to the original question that was asked, two things to point out. One is that, all these financing tools in terms of accessing the low interest loans come once you have an approved plan. It's a prerequisite of getting on the SRF list. So it's an important feature to settle in your minds that you need a settled plan in order to pursue the financing and the subsidies that come with it. Secondly, there are 15 towns, 20 municipal scale public water supplies, so 35 different entities in the water business on the Cape, and there are probably 37 different ways of dealing with betterments. There's no magic formula. There's no right answer. It's what's the right answer for your community. My town, Mashpee, we're not doing betterments. It's all doing on tax rate financing. Chatham, no betterments. Falmouth, big chunk of their piece comes from betterments. Barnstable, 50% of the cost remaining after subsidy comes from betterments. All over the map. And there's not necessarily consistency between what you charge for a betterment for a wastewater program in a given town and what's charged on a water supply betterment in a given town. They're just, you got to look at the facts and figures as they pertain to your community at the time you're making the decision, and make a decision based on what you think is palatable and fair. The benefit of sewer betterments is that, it's a revenue stream that takes a dollar for dollar off what you have to finance through your tax rate.
Okay.
So anyway.
All right, Mike, you had your hand up earlier.
I was just gonna say that this is not meant to be a financial plan, just an options for financing, and that the select board, along with what's already been said, committees would come up with a plan to pay for it once we get there. But these are just finance options.
Okay. I think we're good to advance. Scott?
Okay. So this debt issuance section is what, the term's not in here, the SRF program that we referred to. This is essentially part of that. But this most broadly would be any sort of, long-term loan program. But I think, as Andrew already indicated, the most attractive one clearly is to go through the SRF program, which is funded through the Mass Clean Water Trust, as it said here. And I think the most attractive part of it, potentially these 0% loans. So as Andrew already stated, once a plan is approved, we can then apply to the state to get on the list to get this funding. And then a second part of that would be the so-called loan forgiveness, up to 25% through the previous vehicle that we talked about. But this section really is a little bit broader than just SRF, because of course the town could look to other means of doing long-term financing.
Okay. Is there any loan forgiveness as part of the SRF program, or is it exclusively through the Cape and Islands Water Protection Fund?
Well, they're linked, and I think, as Andrew said before, to access the so-called loan forgiveness, 25%, we have to get, the town would have to get an SRF loan to pre-qualify for that. But Andrew, please elaborate.
Andrew?
Yeah, so Mr. Chair, there are two pots of loan forgiveness. One is the 25% or 50% for the small projects offered by the Cape and Islands Trust. Clean Water Trust also has a formula by which they do allocate some nominal loan forgiveness ranging from 3.3 to 9.9%, depending on a complex formula that generally disfavors Cape Cod. And I believe about half the communities on the Cape qualify for the lowest tier of 3.3%. But off the top of my head, I don't recall where Wellfleet falls on that formula. It has to do with equalized valuations and some housing costs. It tends to be oriented towards bigger cities. But for example, Mashpee qualified for 3.3% forgiveness on its loan on top of the 25% that came from the trust fund.
Okay. All right. And I'm assuming that we would be most likely applying for the 0% loan. Is correct?
I think so, yes.
Yeah, you'd want to.
Yep.
And then any loan forgiveness comes on top of that.
Okay. All right.
Thing to add, if I might, Mr. Chair.
Yep. Go ahead.
Yeah, there's also a number of grant programs. SRF Smart Growth has a 25% forgiveness. USDA rural loans can provide up to 50 to 75% grant forgiveness. There's a rural small town growth initiative, which is pure grant, 50,000 to 400,000. There's Section 319 federal grants. And then lastly, Mass Works. So basically that's a collection of grant sources that can be used, again, dovetailed specifically to, whether it's enhanced IA or 95 Lawrence or permeable reactive barrier. Each one of those could potentially be applied to one of those particular programs.
Okay. And do you have anything to add on this, Scott? Sorry.
Not on that item, no.
Are there any questions on federal and state grants?
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize you were talking about that. I'm sorry. I thought you were talking about the previous item. I'll just mention a couple things on the grants, Ryan, if I may.
Yep.
There's many grant programs out there, and they could apply to various parts of the plan as it's currently drafted. For example, the state has a coastal pollutant remediation program that would fund some stormwater projects. I think the town has already received grant money through other grant means for stormwater projects along Commercial Street. There may be a number of grant programs that would be applicable to the INA portion of the program, especially for a pilot program. We've been talking with people about possibly funding the RME part of that program through a grant. So, this is something we previously, Kurt actually puts a pretty extensive list together of potential grant programs that we provided earlier on, and we can certainly reiterate that here in more detail.
Okay. Should there also be non-federal or state grant as a potential funding source as well?
Sure, if it exists. What are you thinking of particularly, Ryan?
I don't know. I'm just, including as much as we can.
Right.
So.
Sure. Well, actually, Cape Cod Commission may be a source. They've provided some money for the 95 Lawrence project, or a vehicle to part of that funding. So there may be some money, and I think Erin's on here. I don't know if she wants to add anything, but I think primarily most of those funds do originate through federal and state sources.
Okay, Erin. Sorry, give Rebecca a second. All right, you're good to go.
All right, thank you. Just in response to Scott's comments, so that was the 95 Lawrence project was in part funded through a district local technical assistance grant. So those are grants that the commission, as one of the regional planning agencies, is able to provide to communities typically on an annual basis, and it's been a fairly reliable source. There are requirements on an annual basis for kind of state priorities. So there are some limitations as to what can be funded generally, but that's one potential source, I think, moving forward. So just to provide a little bit more context for that one.
Okay. All right, any other questions on this? Okay, so property taxes?
Yeah, I don't think I need to say much about this. We've had the prior discussion earlier tonight. This is obviously a mechanism to provide revenues for the program, and depending on the size of it, may require debt exclusion. But I don't think I need to add anything to this.
Okay, so for capital expenses, might not necessarily be a debt an override, it would be a debt exclusion. For operating costs, where you have the same, expected schedule of costs, you would want an override to fund it. So.
Actually, as part of the financing, when you get an SRF loan, they make you do a long-term finance plan to ensure that you have the rate structure sufficient to operate, maintain, and replace the system as it ages. So, and set up a dedicated fund to enable that to happen. So, looking at an override to supplement your operating funds on a capital piece would not be looked at initially with great favor by the treasurer's office in the first instance. You'd have to work on them with that.
Okay.
There are other aspects of what you're doing that might not be associated with a capital infrastructure program that you might want to provide an override to fund and have your rate structure cover the actual long-term O&M replacement cost of your capital facility.
Okay. And then I know that the Cape Cod Commission also has some comments on financing, their financing plan. Erin, could you bring us up to speed on that?
Sure.
Sorry, I put you on the spot.
No, it's okay. I'm just trying to figure out how to unmute there for a second. Sure. So I can make just a few brief comments. I think, we've relayed this previously, in our kind of preliminary reviews of the plan, and I'm happy to see the discussion tonight about financing. I think, while we haven't done a kind of a full 208 consistency determination or reviewed it for all of the criteria to date, understanding that the community is still working on this plan and determining financing options and potential funding opportunities. One of the areas where we feel some additional work does need to be done is around determining costs associated with implementation, and then also what financing strategies may be used to implement the plan moving forward. So I guess I would just note that we're glad to see that you're having this discussion. I think this is an element where we would be looking for some additional detail when we're reviewing for 208 consistency in the future.
Okay, thank you. Any questions at this time? Okay, seeing none, onto it's supposed to be the status of the projects approved at the 2021 annual town meeting. We don't have a slide for it though, but it is on the agenda. Are there, Scott, I know you haven't had an update.
Yeah, so I can comment. There are three items from town meeting, and I can address the first one. And I think Hillary, if she's here, may want to address another one. But on one of the items, which was to fund a preliminary value of a permeable reactive barrier pilot project, I have been in discussion with a representative at EPA who has been coordinating and involved all the PRB projects on the Cape. Marcel Bellevaux is his name. And we've been looking at the site on Commercial Street. He's also suggested looking at some other areas of town, and I have done that. And there are a couple other areas that might look potential. So I've been going through sort of the process, which is recommended by EPA that they've used in other communities. And then Marcel has also provided a scope of work that they use to do the hydrogeologic investigations at these other sites. And I provided that to Hillary, and we will be editing that and hopefully moving forward with getting a contractor on board to do investigation at one or two of these pilot project sites. So that's my quick update on the PRB project. Happy to answer any questions on that. And then maybe have Hillary talk about the INA funding.
I have one question. What's the expected timeline for the PRB pilot?
Well, I think that I would say the actual work could be completed in 3 to 6 months. It's not a lot of work. It's an installation of some monitoring wells to do some analysis, basically looking for the high nitrogen levels at what depth at these locations. Marcel also recommended doing some water table mapping just to confirm flow directions. So I think this all can be done within a 3 to 6 month time period.
Okay. Are there any questions on the PRB? Okay, Hillary?
Sure. I'm going to speak about the enhanced IA subsidy that was approved at town meeting. We have the money available. I've spoken to a number of people. We have not had any takers yet that are ready to move ahead with a design and installation. We have a plan to reimburse them once systems are in and certificates of compliance are issued. We're also holding a workshop next Wednesday evening at 4 o'clock from 4 to 5:30. We've invited installers, designers, engineers to attend. It's going to be on Zoom. We have some folks that are going to present their technologies. We're going to talk about operation and maintenance options and begin the conversation with those out in the community. We've invited the non-resident taxpayers, the forum, sent out an invite to their list. So we're hoping to get some more public information out there on what we can offer and how these systems are functioning.
Okay, Mike?
Hey, Hillary.
Hi.
Do we know if the subsidy is enough to cover the difference in traditional Title V and an enhanced INA?
So we do think that it comes close to covering the enhanced IA piece of it. It seems like we may also have some money available in the amount we received to fund some of the O&M as well. So we believe we do have enough.
Okay.
Okay, are there any questions for Hillary?
Actually, I have one.
Go ahead, John.
Directly to the issue of the subsidies for the IAs. Is that likely to, what percentage of the cost of installing something like that is that likely to cover?
So it would only cover the cost of the innovative enhanced IA technology. It would not cover the cost of the standard Title V.
No, I understand that, but I mean, if somebody wanted to add that to an existing Title V system.
So we're looking at giving folks around $12,500 for that. And then the regular standard Title V is anywhere between 10 and 15,000 as well.
Right, but that could be installed as an add-on to an existing Title V.
Correct. It would just have to be designed.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
And what is the cost for retrofit?
It would still be that 12,500 because that's the fee for the components.
So, the study that Scott cited in his report said it was 14.7.
Well, the number, I think you're referring to the Buzzards Bay Coalition report where they've installed a number of these. And I think their number for a retrofit is around 17,000.
Yeah.
And that includes
make the out of pocket.
installation.
Out of pocket for the homeowner would be around 2,000, 3,000.
It would be the difference between the 12.5 and the 17, I guess.
Yeah. Okay.
And if I may, Mr. Chair, the idea there is just to be equitable to all homeowners. So if somebody's got a failed system or they're putting in a new system and looking to add this component, the money is really for the component, the town's willing to pay for the component. We're not going to do landscaping. People who are doing retrofits, anything complicated that's homeowner related is not envisioned as part of assistance. Really, we're just paying for the enhancement.
I understood that. I was just curious as to what the likely out-of-pocket expenses might be for somebody who does not have a failed system but wants to add on the component.
Right.
Yeah, it'd be about 5,000.
Okay.
So, okay.
Question, sorry.
Go ahead, Mike.
If somebody were to want to look into this, would they go through the proprietary manufacturers for design, or can anyone design these systems?
So anyone can design them. Usually the design engineer would work with the proprietary system owner to get the specs to put onto a plan, but any registered sanitarian or engineer could design one.
Okay.
What is the design price?
That varies company to company.
Do you have a ballpark?
I would be hesitant to throw out a number for fear it's inaccurate.
Ryan, are you referring to the engineering design fees?
Yeah.
Because I can speak, there's another project going on in Barnstable right now that I'm involved in with the Barnstable Clean Water Coalition, and they've got, I think, 8 or so of 12 that are going in this year. And I did recently hear that on average, the engineering fees have been about $3,000 per lot, according to that study.
So then for somebody that wanted to retrofit a pre-existing system that doesn't necessarily have a failed system would have to pay around 8.
I think the 3,000, the engineering fees were included in the Buzzards Bay numbers, the 17, but I can double check that.
Okay. And the O&M costs?
That's not part of the 17, that would be in addition.
Yep.
But as Hillary mentioned, we've been discussing the possibility of using some of the town meeting appropriation to provide funding for the O&M.
I don't think you can, because of the way the article was written. So Kathy Granlund, sorry, I keep doing it.
Thanks. Ken's not here. Sorry, Hillary, Ken's not here. I know we approved money at this for town meeting. Do people looking for AI after field system use have to come before you for approval before they take advantage of these funds?
No, it depends on which system they're improving and what their situation is.
Okay.
All of the systems that get installed get permitted, so they all come before my desk, but they don't all go before the Board of Health. It just
Okay,
depends.
so do we have, and my question again, purely financial, do we have a line of sight into how much of that money is being spent on which systems?
Well, we haven't spent any of it yet because we haven't had any
love
takers.
you.
So as soon as we get a taker, I'm happy to report back to you.
Okay, great. I just wanted to make sure that there was a system in place to make sure that people who were entitled to these funds got them and they
Yes.
got them in an appropriate manner. Thanks, Hillary.
Yes,
Appreciate it.
the idea, just so everyone's clear, is that the homeowner would pay the cost up front. And once their certificate of compliance was issued, then we would submit for reimbursement for them.
Okay, so if you want to use any of the money that was appropriated at town meeting for operating and maintenance, it will have to go back to town meeting to change the article, essentially, because it is specific to the installation only, and not the ongoing operating and maintenance costs. So,
Right, yeah.
Fred Vanderschmidt. Yeah, give her a second. Okay, you're good.
Yeah, I should probably know this, Hillary, but being on the board, but did you develop an application or any kind of criteria for acceptance of stuff? Because I mean, like, like at this point, it's basically, hi, I want to put an A&I system in, and you say, cool, how much, you will give you up to 12,500, right? I mean, like if the difference between the A&I system and the regular system is $5,000, we're not going to give them 12,500, I assume. So, I mean, like, I would assume that there would be some kind of like analysis of like, okay, the engineer said a regular system is going to be 20,000 and an advanced system is going to be 30,000. So that's 10,000. So that's what I'm looking for. Have we developed any kind of application or criteria?
No, there's no application or criteria at this point. I am the only one that issues the permits, and I am the only one that issues the certificates of compliance. So there's none that are going to sneak by my office. That's part one. Part two is the cost will always be more than 5,000. So I think what they were saying is the cost to the homeowner may exceed the 12,500 by 5,000, depending on the installation and the landscaping and the this and the that. So the 12,500, no one would do an install for less than that.
Okay. So, but I still go back to, is there plans for an application? Is there plans for a criteria setting on like how much we're going to take? Because what happens if we get like everybody wants, all of a sudden it's like there's a run on this stuff, which would be a great thing.
Which would be great, but we're about halfway through the year and we don't even have one. I certainly can develop an application for the funding. That's not an issue at all. We can have that just, out in the hallway or available online for folks to fill out. But my guess is at this point, it is first come, first serve. So come on down and get your enhanced IAs. We've got money to give you.
Okay.
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead, Mike.
do we have an idea of what someone would be looking at for operation and management for an enhanced INA at this point per year per?
So it's usually running between, a little more than 1,000 and under 2,000, depending on the system and the frequency
Per year?
per year.
So the person who has it installed is going to be paying 1,000 to 2,000 per year?
So
Right now.
we're still in discussions with the county. We should pick those discussions back up to see if we can work on a way to fund this, because I think what we know is that if the town is in control of the operation and maintenance, we get better results on the end. So those are ongoing discussions.
Kurt,
Yeah, you just recognize Brian Baumgartel if he's on to speak with regard to O&M. The idea here is that the county we would enter into an RME contract with the county, and Brian has done a lot of thinking about how that would work.
okay. If you can find him, Rebecca. All right, there he is.
Hello.
Hi, Brian.
Hi, good evening. For the record, I'm Brian Baumgartel, Director of the Massachusetts Alternative Septic System Test Center at Barnstable County. You've had me here a couple times now to talk about these things, but yes, I do believe that there are opportunities for economies of scale when it comes to operation and maintenance costs. In some of my calculations, I do believe we can make a good run at a sub $1,000 per year operation and maintenance cost per system. And that's going to really depend on the amount of sampling that needs to be done, the number of operation and maintenance visits that need to be made. I think there's some opportunities using remote monitoring to offset some of those costs on the capital side of things, which allows you to, you're not allowed to use some of that funding directly for operation and maintenance, but indirectly via capital expenses to do those monitoring devices remotely can also help to offset some of those costs. So, the county is starting to put together some of the resources that could be needed to support you in your needs as far as an RME goes. And I would say While I can't speak to any specifics, I would say keep an eye on over the next few weeks with the county commissioners and their discussions of how the county is going to spend the ARPA funds. I think there is some potential there that we'd be able to utilize some of that fund to support projects such as yours. So,
Okay, Brian Dudley.
Thank you. I think I mentioned this at the last meeting, but the department is the one that will make, the final decisions on, appropriate structure of RMEs and operation and monitoring requirements. And while presently we are willing to look at the possibility of remote monitoring, it is not something that we are going to automatically approve at the outset. We would want to see some operational data and be assured of the robustness of any kind of remote monitoring in lieu of inspection, actual physical inspections. So, I just wanted to manage expectations that that's the remote monitoring on as a substitute for physical inspections is not going to necessarily be available right out of the box.
Yep. So I do have a question, and then I'll go to Mike. So all the systems that would be considered enhanced IAs are in pilot right now, correct?
No, that's provisional. 2 of them are
Provisional.
provisional. Yeah.
Okay. And so the cost to the homeowner for monitoring those, that requires sampling 4 times a year?
Initially, yes.
Okay. And so in the draft report that's later in the packet, you put those costs around 3,000?
Per year?
Yeah.
That sounds high, but I can check. I'm not sure what you're referring to. I was recalling a number around 2,000 something, but it's in that range.
Yep. So it's not 1,000. Okay.
Not initially, no.
Yeah, I guess just want some clarification here on the monitoring of these systems. Right now, the cost is high. I'm assuming because we're monitoring for efficacy to prove the systems out. And that when these are, if in fact they are, I believe they will be approved systems, not just conditionally approved, then that monitoring changes, the level of the monitoring changes. Is that correct? And maybe that's a question for Brian Dudley, really, as to the extent to which, once these are approved, the state would be looking at monitoring costs. Is this something that would, have to just be inspected once a year, or maybe maybe no one knows yet because they're still provisional?
Brian?
We've come up with monitoring protocol for these systems if they are operated under a responsible management entity. With these systems under provisional use approval, for the duration of the provisional use approval, they will have to be monitored quarterly. When a system is installed after general use approval, when it's first installed, it will be monitored and sampled quarterly for the first year, just to make sure that it is up and running properly. And thereafter, all the systems will, at the beginning of the year, all the systems will be put in a basket, and 10% will be randomly selected for sampling per month. And once the system has been sampled, it comes out of the mix. So then the remainder of those go back into the mix, 10%. That 10% number would be for the next one. So January, February, so on and so on, which means that every system will be sampled at least once a year, and some will be sampled twice a year. Currently, under general use approval, most of the systems are required to be sampled twice a year. So in that regard, the sampling will be a little less stringent than under a straight general use approval. And then, going back to the issue about remote monitoring, we do want to see these systems visited once a month, not to sample, but merely to make sure that they are mechanically operating. Pumps are running, blowers are blowing, that they haven't been disconnected, and that sort of thing. And that's where, at some point in the future, there does exist the possibility that we could look at remote sensing to make sure that those mechanical aspects of the facility are working. But generally, that would be the scheme. And then there is also there would also be enhanced sampling if a system is found to be out of compliance during the normal course of sampling, because we want to make sure that that system could get back into compliance and be operating as expected. But generally, that is the outline of the sampling and monitoring protocols that we would require for any of these IA systems that would be incorporated into a targeted watershed management plan.
Okay, Mike.
Okay, so we're looking at potentially, if I heard this correctly, going down to once to twice a year if they're approved in the system. And I'm just wondering, obviously things would have to change at scale, but even if it was reduced down to $1,000 a system per year, that's about $4 million a year for the number of parcels in Wellfleet. And I don't know if that sounds like what the reality would look like, or am I scaling this wrong? I'm just trying to get some sense of, we have about 4,000 parcels in the town of Wellfleet. What would, I guess, the state be looking at if the town were to hire a company to do these? I'd assume we'd be able to do that at less than, $4 million a year. I don't know, but I just don't know. It seems high to me. I didn't have any sense of the cost of monitoring these systems until now.
Kurt?
Yeah, I think it's an excellent question, Mike. And I think what we're thinking about here is trying to walk before we run and get some systems in the ground. I think Brian, has laid out what DEP is expecting. Brian Baumgartel's talked about what the potential technology improvements might look like. And right now, we don't really know. That's the straight up answer. And as we get systems in and as we begin to see what their performance looks like, we'll have a better sense of what that longer term monitoring cost would look like. Clearly doing a back of the envelope today, it looks pretty expensive. I think most people would anticipate, and Brian sort of spoke to this, that one would expect that the cost, especially at scale, would come down significantly, but hard to know right now. And what Scott's done is certainly put this in as a 5-year initial pilot so that we can begin to gather that data and answer the question that you just asked, Mike.
Okay, Brian Dudley.
Yeah, I think, you know, going to the issue about if you hire somebody, that certainly is an option, but it would be that the town would still be administering the operation and maintenance program, even though it may be contracted out to a third party. And that's, you know, that is certainly a common model for the operation of wastewater treatment plants. Chatham is a good example. Provincetown's a good example. They actually hire contract operations firms, but as the permittees, the towns are still the responsible entities to ensure compliance with the permit and the conditions of the permit. And, you know, so that's, you know, I think that's similar to what, you know, Mr. DeVasta was suggesting. So I just essentially wanted to say that is a common model, but it would not absolve the community from its responsibilities just because they would choose to hire a third party operator.
Okay, I have a question and then I'm gonna go to Kathy. So initially, I mean, let's say these systems start going in the ground. We basically need an RME ready to accommodate them. But how do we go from, I mean, initially it might be a pretty small scale program. And how do we establish an RME if there's only a, you know, less than 10 systems, let's say, in the ground for a given year?
Ryan, I'll take a first crack at that. I'm involved, as is Brian and others. There are 3 groups that I'm involved in who are looking at this RME structure development. And there's a bunch of models out there that EPA has developed. And I think there are multiple options that the town can consider, but you're absolutely right. Initially, I think during phase 1 as the plan I drafted, this would be relatively small number of systems. So it would be a lot less onerous. But as Mr. DeVasto pointed out, at full implementation, we're dealing with a large number of systems. And as Brian Baumgartel mentioned, and he and I have been discussing this, there will definitely be economies of scale as to how you manage those systems when you have that many in the ground. So the RME structure, I think, would probably evolve from something pretty basic initially to something a lot more sophisticated at full implementation. But I see Brian has his hand up, and he's been really the speaking a lot on the RME, so I defer to him for further clarification.
Okay, Brian Baumgartel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, so I think to that point, one of the key aspects of getting an RME program off the ground is trying to find some seed funding, because obviously you're going to have to hire personnel to do sampling. You're going to have to get, you know, vehicles and all sorts of things, you know, sort of put together to get that initial program running. At the county level, I'm looking at options on how we can put that initial program together. So I've been looking for sources of funding. Again, I alluded earlier to the ARPA funds as a potential resource. There are some EPA funding possibilities. There are some possibilities through the Clean Water Trust. They've indicated an interest in perhaps putting up some financing to start a pilot RME program. So we are at the county level looking at ways that we can pull some of those resources together to get this, you know, to sort of build it, and they will come kind of a concept, knowing that there aren't going to be a whole lot of these right off the bat, and it's going to have to be offset somehow and subsidized to get the program running. So we are working on that that particular aspect.
Okay, would it make sense to have an RME that would service the IAs that are pre-existing to achieve initial scale? Because otherwise, if you're just trying to bid out, like, you know, a handful of systems, the cost is going to be pretty prohibitive to hire somebody for that, if you can even find somebody.
Is that directed at me?
Yeah, I guess it's
Okay,
directed at
okay.
you.
Thank you. I would say, it's definitely worth going back and looking at the older technologies to see which ones might be able to contribute to the solution, because you have, I think, 158, Scott, was that the number we gave you earlier
That's right.
today?
Yep.
Because the county keeps track of all of the existing IA systems in town. We have the data set that shows what their performance is, and how they've been operated and maintained over the 20 years that we've been doing it now almost. So I think there's some value in going back and identifying which of those technologies were performing well and could be ingested into an RME program to help meet your compliance needs. And that could help to offset some of the initial costs as well associated with getting the program going. Right now, those systems are operated under the current scheme, which is completely done by the private sector. You have an operation and maintenance contractor who goes out, does the O&M, does the sampling, and then reports that back to the town via the database that we run, and also to DEP via the same system. But it's completely up to the homeowner to make sure that their operation and maintenance contract is in line with what's required for them. The RME would take it to the next level, so that we're eliminating some of those, the homeowner pieces of it, and centralizing it into a municipal function. So I hope that helps.
Kathy Greenland. Oh, you just muted yourself.
Thanks. Thanks, Ryan.
Yep.
Thanks for recognizing me again. Thank you for everyone who spoke before me. And again, purely from a finance committee standpoint, costs going forward, cost of implementation, costs going forward when we're subsidizing people for these IA projects, monitoring who's going to pay upon the failure. If we're subsidizing somebody to do the right thing and the system fails, I realize that this is kind of, tossing around ideas at this point. My thing kind of is going forward with great ideas up front, but making sure on the back end, we have processes and procedures in place to make sure that the back end of this is also financed and ready to go when people come up against challenges. So I know we're not that far down the road right now. But again, looking from a finance standpoint, monitoring who's going to pay this, who's going to pay if there's a failure, who's going to pay if we're subsidizing somebody, and all of that stuff needs to be looked at as an ongoing theme. So, okay,
Mike DeVasto.
Yeah, just to Brian, who pays for the older technology monitoring right now of the INA systems? Is it it's all private sector, you said, but is it the property owner that's paying that, or is it, how's that funded?
Brian?
There we go. Yes, so that is right now it's entirely funded by the property owner themselves. They're the ones who hold the contracts with the operation and maintenance provider, who also does the monitoring. So they receive a bill usually on a quarterly basis. Varies a lot from operator to operator because it is a private sector function right now. A lot of them are charging somewhere between $300 to $500 for each individual operation and maintenance visit. The sampling is really dictated by laboratory costs.
Okay, that's what my follow-up question here is, what the process is for actually monitoring these that costs approximately $500 to $600 for the enhanced INAs right now, or somewhere in the neighborhood of $500 to $1,000 per visit. Right now, is it the same type of sampling that takes place in an older technology INA system? Are they having to dig? Is there a process for monitoring these that, is built into the system? Or what's the process? And is that something that can be made, simpler in the technology of the system?
Brian?
Yes, thank you. So the existing systems that are out there, they all have to have sampling ports already. So that would be easy to basically ingest them into a potential program because they're already being monitored. The newer technologies, again, they all have to have some sort of a sampling port built into them. So, I mean, as far as the monitoring, the physical aspect of doing the monitoring goes, those things are already available. You wouldn't have to dig anything new in or anything like that. Those monitoring ports are available now.
Okay, so it's just going there, getting the sample, checking to make sure that the pump is functioning, and then lab costs. Basically.
More or less. Yeah,
Okay.
more or less. Yeah.
Thanks.
And Mr. Chairman, if I may just add to that, I mentioned earlier the project in Barnstable that is underway, and EPA is assisting on this, and Brian Baumgartel is assisting. There's a number of people involved, and I just want to point out, with those installations, they are installing the remote monitoring devices that we referred to earlier in each. So they will be able to begin to develop that database that Brian Dudley has correctly mentioned many times that he needs to see before there's any, potential movement to a long-term remote monitoring program. But I just wanted to point out that that research is underway and systems are being installed with that technology as recently as last week.
Okay.
Okay, I have a question for Brian Dudley. Does the town have to have an approved watershed permit or 208 plan to establish an RME?
No, not to establish an RME. The requirement for a water, or what you would benefit from with a watershed permit is to get nitrogen reduction credits from the non-traditional approaches, like enhanced IA systems that have not yet achieved general use approval, PRBs, shellfish, and any of the other non-traditional approaches that you may consider. But to establish a responsible management entity, that could be done now.
Okay. All right. On that, I would like to move on. I know that was a little bit longer than expected for that topic. So public engagement. I'll actually ask Aaron Perry to speak on the need for, or basically the 208. I'm going to space on the name. Sorry, 208 consistency and compliance for
Sure.
public engagement.
Sure. So, I can touch on those briefly. I know they were part of your packet. There are a couple of elements, I guess, that I'll point to specifically. The primary element is in the 208 consistency review criteria. Criteria number 4, the public was engaged to gain plan consensus. I think that's really one of the more critical elements of 208 consistency review, in that it allows many stakeholders and voices to be part of the process to really encourage more successful implementation in the long term, and continued successful implementation in the long term. And so, I think there has been a lot done to date on public participation, including, meetings that the community hasn't been engaged in for years. I think I've been attending meetings out in Wellfleet since I started here at the commission. So both through the 208 process and then through your local planning. And, I think the meetings like you're holding today, where there's collaboration and communication amongst all of the necessary boards, are a critical component of that. But, that's going to be something that has to be sustained over the long term. And so, certainly when it is time for us to go through a kind of that more formal 208 consistency review and issue that determination, we'll be considering all that you've done to get to this point. And I think also looking at what the plan is for continuing that public participation and kind of public outreach, really to encourage the successful kind of positive town meeting votes. That's the ultimate indicator, I think, think, of your public engagement strategy, that you're successfully able to get those town meeting votes to move forward with implementation. That's really what we're looking for, and what we're interested in supporting you in as you move forward. So that's the primary element here. There is another element that I think was included in your packet relative to maintaining your 208 consistency determination. Typically, 208 consistency determinations are good for 5 years, unless it's otherwise stated for a reason specific to an individual community. What we would be looking for each community to do toward the end of that 5-year period is really look at the changes anticipated based on your adaptive management plan, and make sure that you have stakeholders and the public engaged in any changes that you're making moving forward, based on performance monitoring or anything new about technologies or transitions you might want to make in order to be more successful. So that's an element that's a little bit further down the road, and something that the commission can assist with too. But I think it's a critical component as you move forward, regardless of what strategies you choose to implement. So something that we have done for other communities, and I think was mentioned at the last meeting, is developing a public outreach strategy for implementation of the plan that the community chooses to try to move forward with. And so that's something that we're certainly willing and able to help with if you'd like us to do that. So, and I think that's, unless you have any specific questions, I'm certainly happy to answer those, but I think that's probably all I have to say on it for the moment.
Okay, Brian Baumgartel.
Sure. I would just like to offer, as the test center and as running a staff of a lot of experts in this particular area of innovative alternative septic systems, we have made a lot of effort toward public education and outreach in this particular area. So if you would like assistance in developing materials, whether that be print materials, video materials, we have a pretty large repertoire of what we can do. We are certainly willing and able to assist you in those efforts as well.
Okay, so I talked to Erin a little bit earlier today as well. So I'd actually like to, and so she said that I was asking about developing a public outreach strategy, and potentially assistance developing that, and assistance in facilitating, I guess, facilitating the public outreach. I think right now we are all aware that Wellfleet's administrative staff is otherwise occupied for a while. So I'd actually like to make a motion, and that's I'll include it's Mass Tech, correct, Brian?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay. So I move to request the assistance of the Cape Cod Commission and Mass Tech to develop and implement the town's wastewater planning public engagement process, and to facilitate it. Janet, you're muted. Is there a second?
Second.
1 second. Janet?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, can I have a roll call vote?
Janet, I.
John, I.
Michael, I.
Ryan, I. Okay, motion carries 4-0.
Where's Helen?
She left.
Oh.
All right, and then in terms of presenting the plan or planning, so ultimately this plan is ultimately the town's plan, and it's actually the select board's plan. It should be made clear. So Hillary, I see you have your hand up.
Sorry, I just wanted to hear what that motion was again. I feel like I
Okay.
missed a piece of it, and it seems fairly important.
So I move to request the assistance of the Cape Cod Commission and Mass Tech to develop and implement the town's wastewater planning public engagement process, and to help facilitate it.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. And that way it's easier. it is a part of the 208 consistency determination. So I would say their help would be invaluable in terms of getting a permit relatively quickly. I don't know. And then, so as part of that, as part of presenting these plans, as I said, the plan is ultimately the towns and the select board specifically. And I wouldn't be comfortable having a plan presented without the approval of the select board and without the presence of town staff, to make sure, because one of the things that we really need to be careful of is adequately incorporating the feedback that we receive, and to present the town's best face. So I would like to move that any presentation of Wellfleet's wastewater plan be made with the approval of the select board, and shall be made by town staff and those otherwise employed by the town. Is there a second?
Is this presentations to
The general
anyone?
public. Yep,
To the general public?
yep.
Okay. And that would include Scott as someone being employed by the town generally?
Wellfleet, yes, or
Okay.
otherwise employed.
And the committee, the Clean Water Advisory Committee, would be able to host those still, just presentations would be made, or?
I would want the town staff to host. That's how the majority of towns are doing it.
Okay. I was just asking, so.
Yeah.
I do have a question.
Sure.
What is the process for, would we have to appropriate funds for, putting somebody on the town payroll to do this? Or has that
No,
already been done?
there's either the staff that's already on board, such as Hillary, or the, consultants that are hired, such as Scott. And the Cape Cod Commission will actually, the Cape Cod Commission might be the appropriate host for it if they're assisting the town. Aaron, would you be comfortable with that?
Thank you. I think it's the town's plan and it's your implementation strategy. I think there would need to be a host at the town level. It's your plan. We can assist with the strategy and with some of the tasks associated with that. And we can work with you to develop kind of what that looks like, a scope of work for that effort. But I think hosting by the town is appropriate.
Yeah. Okay.
If you're still looking for a second, I'll second.
Okay.
Right.
Yep. Go ahead,
Craig
Kurt.
wants to say something.
Yeah, I'm a little confused by, what role you want the committee to play, if any. It sounds like essentially this is a public firing and you don't want, that's the way we've been operating is with, hosting is done by town staff. We've been working closely with Hillary. I'm really kind of confused by, what exactly is anticipated here. I would like to point out relative to public outreach, the committee since 2014 has conducted probably 5 public meetings with the Natural Resources Advisory Board, about 20 with the Shellfish Advisory Board, 7 with Conscom, quite a few with Board of Health, Housing Partnership, Housing Trust, Planning Board, FinCom, Water Board, BOS, Wellfleet forums. We've had 5. We've had 5 public hearings. That's advertised public hearings, including 2 with DEP. We've done 2 non-resident taxpayer meetings. We've had 7 Mayo Creek Restoration Committee meetings. We had an authorization in 22 of $500,000 to develop the plan. We got town meeting to approve $324,500 and got 8 committee votes to do composting toilets in 2013 for Bakersfield. We supported the Culch barge and bathymetric data collection in 2015.
Okay, Kurt.
90,000. Just
Kurt,
let me.
you've made your.
If you don't
you're gonna
mind.
go- No, no.
Well, just let me finish what we've done and then.
So that was enough time. Like, we get it, that you've done a lot of work. You're up to 2014. You have additional 7 years, or not 2000, yeah, 7 years to cover. of
Well,
your-
and it's about 5 more things.
Yeah,
So,
so,
you know, the sense that I'm getting is that somehow we haven't been doing due diligence here, or I'm just not sure what the exact role you're envisioning for the committee, because effectively, you know, it doesn't sound like there's a role for the committee any longer.
So respectfully, at this point where we're actually in the process of actually going through and applying for the watershed permit, at this point, it's beyond conceptual. And ultimately, the select board needs to own it. And it's where it's ultimately the select board's plan, and it's, you know, the select board needs to own it, basically, once it gets to this point, because we're committing the town to something, and something substantial.
May I make a comment?
No, you've already made your comment. So,
With regard to your comment.
yep. So Janet,
Are you finished, Ryan?
yep, I'm finished.
So, you know, 3 years ago, town meeting voted to hire someone in a water position. And Hillary, we've talked about that with Hillary. And I do think I'd like you to reread your motion, but I think there is the next step that, so, I mean, this was a very impressive meeting. This was really, really wonderful. But I kind of want to think about the next step with hiring, or who, or Board of Health, DPW. I don't know. I'm not sure about the next step. So I'm not comfortable just voting on it, but would you reread the motion and maybe I'll be more comfortable? But I hear what Kurt's saying too, and it just, I don't know. I just think it needs to be a little bit more professional than saying it's the select board's purview or whatever it is. So,
It is the select board's purview.
well, I know, but there needs to be more, I don't know, please reread your motion.
Okay, I move that, I move that any presentation on Wellfleet's wastewater plan be made with the approval of the Wellfleet Select Board and shall be made by town staff or those otherwise employed by the town.
Okay.
For the sake of discussion, Mr. Chair,
Yes,
Yeah.
go ahead.
I just don't know that it really changes anything that's not already going on, because generally we have Scott here giving presentations. I don't have a problem with the motion, but I think I'm not sure what it accomplishes, I guess.
So this would be where the plan is presented to the public, not at a select board meeting.
Okay.
Wait, say that again. It needs to be presented at a,
So as part of the 208 process, there has to be a pretty extensive public outreach component. I know Kurt's listed a number of boards and committees. But, you know, this is basically to finalize the plan and present it to the public. And, you know, other towns, it's town staff that is presenting. So.
I think, could we just revise this to be like, because I don't mind, I'd like the committee to still have a role in presenting somewhat. And I don't think we've reached a final plan yet, but I do think like presenting to the town, you know, it's important. I kind of assumed we'd be having some kind of community forum, but I would hate to sort of cut the committee off completely from being involved in presentation. But I do think that we do have to sort of have the select board involved now. So I think if we can sort of revise it just to, you know, give the select board involvement over any presentations, I think I would vote for that. But I don't know if I feel comfortable just cutting off the advisory board from being involved in the presentation.
Okay,
Alright.
John?
Yeah, I feel the same way. I think, you know, they've been working with Scott, they've been working with a lot of other people that are involved in this, and I think they should be part of the presentation process.
Okay,
So one more quick thing that I'll
Yep.
add to this. So when you're when you're an unpaid member of a local town board and committee, you are considered, I'm trying to, a municipal employee. And even though you're a private citizen, you're serving on a special or advisory board. So I don't know. I want to
yeah, it's the
think about this
special,
longer.
the
Yeah.
special municipal employees is a list that is in process of being updated. It's not necessarily every member of a committee.
Right, so I think I want this a little more formalized.
Okay, so I move, so I'll revise the motion. I move that any presentation of Wellfleet's wastewater plan be made with the approval of the Wellfleet Select Board and shall be made by the town staff, those otherwise employed by the town and the Clean Water Advisory Committee.
I second that.
Okay.
And one more quick question. So when you say any presentation, that's
I
very
think
vague.
any formal presentation, sorry, Janet, sorry, Ryan.
go ahead.
I think what he's saying is any formal, at this point, we're at a stage in the 208 planning where we have to start presenting this to get public buy-in and to inform the town exactly what our plans are going forward, take feedback and put that feedback into the plan, or at least respond to it in some way. And that should be a formal process of presenting to the public, where there's sort of a unified voice in a
All
way,
right,
so
I
that
get it. Yeah.
it's not presented in 1,000 different ways. I think
Right.
that's what Ryan's getting at here. I think
Okay.
it's a formalization of the presentation process. So
Okay,
I think, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep, that's the intent. So Hillary?
okay.
Hillary?
Yeah, give her a
Hillary.
second. Okay, you're good.
Sorry, I was just gonna say, I think it might be beneficial for us to take this conversation back inside town hall, not have this discussion in this forum at the moment until we can touch base with Charlie and seek some input from him on how to move forward.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think we need a little bit more clarity and yes.
So I guess what I'm asking is that perhaps we could hold off on this vote possibly till your next meeting, till we can chat with Charlie, and find a realistic path forward. I think I understand the concerns of the select board. I understand the committee's role, and I just want to have a conversation with Charlie before we do anything tonight.
Okay, I've already discussed this with him.
I think the motion made right now sort
Yep.
of keeps everything together, but it just requires that the select board's involved in the presentation process. And I think that that's, at this point, warranted, as long as, everybody else that's been working on it is still involved,
Well, so how do you include them? How do we?
They're
I
included,
mean, I
they're included in the motion.
Ryan included them in the motion.
That's the question.
Okay, Kurt,
So we have a planned meeting, with a very large planned meeting next on November 10th. How would you envision us going forward with something like that? I mean, in other words, I guess what I'm unclear about is we're not obviously, the committee is not rogue. We're not operating outside the realm or the sphere of the Board of Selectmen. We are certainly advisory through the Board of Selectmen. I'm just not clear on exactly what would be required for formal approval from the Board of Selectmen to make a presentation. We're working on your behalf. If we're not working on your behalf, then you should fire us. If we're not consistent with what you want to see happen, you should fire us. So I don't really exactly understand how that's going to work. I'm not saying I'm not willing to figure out how to make it work. Clearly we work for you. And that is the way it works. I would see the process as simply as being a little bit simpler. Scott's got a draft plan. We haven't gotten to it tonight. Once the board, we've done a lot of work to try to get public comment. We will forward those comments back to the board and back for public discussion, try to integrate all of this information. My thought would be that we'd have a final draft once Scott's had an opportunity to get those comments and revise something that the board could then approve. And I think once the plan is approved and once a watershed permit is written, then the board has completed its charge. The charge was developed by the Board of Selectmen almost 10 years ago. So if you want to revise the charge, that's fine too.
respectfully, Kurt, I've had the town clerk check. There is currently no written charge for the Clean Water Advisory Committee. They've looked. But Kathleen?
I think I'm unmuted. Thank you for recognizing me, Mr. Chair. I'm in agreement with Michael and John in that I think at this stage it's imprudent to cut the Clean Water Advisory Committee off at this point. They have been spearheading this draft and this plan now for almost 10 years. They're deeply invested in it and know the ins and outs of it, can talk about it at a community forum, can present it. And it's important for the town going forward to present a united front, and the select board, I'm sure is going to make sure that happens. I'm kind of in agreement with Hillary. It's kind of, I would hold on this decision until you've talked with your interim town manager, Charlie Sumner. I'd give him a few days off this week, but it's been a great meeting, a lot of information, and very respectfully, I think the committee has done an awesome and excellent job. Thank you.
Yeah, so they're still included in the motion that was made. But, Fred McGee.
Yeah, and I hope this is pertinent. I don't know if it is. Certainly we've heard Kurt and Felix a number of times on the finance committee. And so our focus is always on money or financing as it should be. And I think the one thing that I would enhance, at least my understanding of the presentation tonight, and getting to a watershed permit and whatnot would be to get a better sense. We talked about ways to raise the money to offset the costs, but I don't have a great sense of what the scope of the costs is off of this meeting tonight. Is it 50 million? Is it 200 million? Is it a range? If we do this, is it less? Is if we do that, is it more? I'm still not 100% sure that I understand what when we get to a crossroad, as Yogi Berra said, take it. Well, there's still a left and a right, you know? It's still, if we do this, it'll cost this and the DEP will give us, you know, what will be more likely to get the watershed permit. And if we do that, it'll cost that and maybe we won't. It's those kinds of questions that will drive at least our understanding from Finance Committee of, does this seem like a reasonable amount of money to spend for that result? I just want to say that.
Okay. All right. So to the members of the board, do you want this question tonight or do you want to wait?
I'd prefer to actually hold off on this right now.
Okay.
I just think, you know.
All right. So we'll take no action.
Okay, but really great job. Really amazing. So good meeting.
Okay. So town planning process. So this is kind of a question for Brian. Dudley, if he's still with us, is he? Yes, okay. So Brian is retiring in December. Who will be on the DEP team in addition to Andrew?
Well, Drew will be the main point of contact. I think secondarily, our Southeast Regional Director, Millie Garcia Serrano, certainly has taken an active interest in this planning process. The Deputy Regional Director for the Bureau of Water Resources, Gerard Martin, also would be available. And then our new staff person who will be working under Drew, Ian Jarvis, will be participating in review and attendance at meetings.
Okay. I know Aaron was curious about that as well. And then, so with this plan right now, how will it be processed by the DEP through the transition?
Well, I mean, we have received the draft. I've reviewed it. I believe that Drew has started reviewing it. And we do have some comments on it that we will certainly be willing to discuss with the town.
Okay. Well, are there any questions from the board or members of the public?
Nope.
Okay. Well, Brian, if we don't get a chance again, I wish you a very happy retirement. And,
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
okay. So I'd like to try to get to the next item, which is treatments by sub-embayments. So I know that Scott has some additional slides to provide the board. Is that correct, Scott?
Yes, I just unmuted.
Okay.
So yeah, there's only 6 slides, so
yep.
I know time is running away from us here, but I can move through them pretty quickly and see what kind of questions you have.
These things that we have in our packet, I think they are.
There's one slide in the packet, but Scott had been preparing some additional ones as well.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, while his team is up, can I just quickly, Fred, to to reach back to Fred's question about the finance, what the costs look like. Scott's draft was circulated to all of the relevant committees, including finance. So Fred, what I encourage the finance committee to do, and certainly circulate this among members, is take a look at his almost 50-page document. It's detailed very, very carefully what the actual costs are of various scenarios in there. So it is laid out. I was hoping that we would discuss that first this evening so that would be clearer. The chair actually had good reasons for wanting to discuss finance first, but this is laid out and it is very, very well detailed, especially for the kind of questions that Kathy and you were having.
Okay. Scott, we see your desktop and
Okay, great.
a slide. All right.
Okay, so let me start by saying Ryan asked me to go through each of the sub-embayments individually. I did in the report. All of the data I'm going to show you is in the report. I've just broken it out sort of slide by slide so that you can see it a little bit easier, and then I've added some graphics as you can see here on the first slide.
Scott, 1 second. You're
just to point to some of the
Scott, 1 second. You're
so
Scott,
and
1
we'll
second.
start with Duck Creek.
All right, now we can hear you.
There
You're breaking up.
What I might suggest is if you can hear me, I have your slides and I could do the slides. I think your bandwidth is too low for the material. So if we could, what I could do is switch to those slides, and I'll start with, let me just see if I can tee it up here. Can I share screen? Okay.
There you go.
Yep.
Is that full screen for you now?
Yes.
So Scott, if you'll just tell me what to do.
Lost him. 1 second. He said he was having problems with his internet earlier.
Yeah, he was, and he sent the slides to me as a backup so that hopefully we could. He says he can't. No.
Can he call in?
He's not in the waiting room, just so you know.
Yep.
He did say if he lost, he would try to call in, and then I could navigate the slides.
Yep. All right, let's give him a minute to call in. It usually takes a minute to get through the menus. So
Hang on, here he is. Give me 1 sec.
all right, and can you unmute him?
All set.
I think if I turn my video off, that might help here.
No, we've got
it
you
is
good
off.
now. Kurt has your slides.
I've got your slides up, Scott. So just tell me what to do.
Okay. Well, the first one, the first. Let me close my slides then. Okay. All right. So the first slide is Duck Creek. You have that one up, Kurt?
We do.
Okay. So at the top, the nitrogen load number is a number that originally comes from the MEP report. And I say originally because I have added a 2035 planning deadline, or planning horizon, I should say. So this number is the load that would exist at 2035. So what I've essentially done is taken the existing load in the MEP, and then by adding building permits have estimated what the load would be in 2035 at the growth rate. The threshold comes directly from the MEP reports, and then subtracting the two would be the reduction required, and these are in kilograms per year of nitrogen. On the right is the percentage reduction required at the 2035 planning horizon. And then the numbers, and then as you can see, there's a space, and below that are the strategies that I've proposed in each one of these sub-embayments, and the individual kilogram per reduction for each one, and then I've computed the percentage of how each one of those strategies achieves the objective of getting to the threshold. So I just want to kind of explain the general format. So for Duck Creek, you can see, and the other thing I should mention, for each one of these, you will see something that's called Enhanced INA Future and Enhanced INA Upgrade. So let me explain the difference there. What I'm presuming in this plan is that a regulation is adopted by the town such that going forward, new growth would go on to one of these so-called enhanced INA systems. So that reduction, the 181, would be a reduction from the growth that would occur between current and 2035. And that's an estimate of what kind of growth in this particular watershed would occur. And again, the reduction by applying those systems. The enhanced INA upgrades are for existing systems. And you'll notice down at the bottom, I have a footnote here. And in each case, I've calculated a range of essentially how many of these existing septics, or more correctly put, what percentage of the nitrogen load would have to be reduced in each one of these sub-watersheds. So you'll see that range in the bottom will change in each watershed. And the reason there's a range is because I've done 3 scenarios in each sub-watershed at 3 performance levels for the enhanced INAs. And you may recall I presented this at a past meeting. I've selected 5 milligrams per liter, 8 milligrams per liter, and 11 milligrams per liter as what I believe is a reasonable range to assume that these systems will perform at. Best guess at this point, I guess, based on the data, I think the 8 milligrams per liter in the middle is a good planning number. So that's what these values are showing. But again, the footnote will provide the complete range of compliance. And then fertilizers and stormwater are 2, you can see, much smaller components. What I've done at this point in the plan is taken the 208 derived assumption that the town can achieve a 25% reduction of each one of those through a variety of programs going forward. As an example of that, yesterday I met with the Mass DOT contractors to talk about the Route 6 stormwater project. We have another meeting on that tomorrow to achieve some of those numbers. You can see in this case, we are not presuming any shellfish reductions, and that's simply because in my many communications with Nancy Chavetta and other staff, as well as the Shellfish Advisory Board, that Duck Creek does not look like a viable place. So we've excluded that. You will see also on the left here, I mentioned earlier tonight that town meeting had approved some funding to look at a pilot project in the Commercial Street area as one of the likely areas. So I've identified that in this plan. Where I'm showing it here is more than the pilot. This would be a PRB that would run a good part of the length of Commercial Street. As part of this plan, I'm also including the 95 Lawrence project, and the 622 kilogram reduction comes directly from the Bowler report, that was done for the town. So that's a very quick explanation of what is here and sort of the format going forward. And Mr. Chairman, if you'd like, I will continue and maybe take questions after we see all of them, or would you rather?
We're going to do it slide by side, I think.
Okay, that's fine.
I have a question, and then I'm going to go to Mike. So the earlier calculations, you used a time horizon of 2052. What changed to change it to 2035?
Actually, I'm sorry, this is a typo. This is 2052. I
Okay.
apologize. And I think it says that in the report. I think I transcribed it incorrectly. My apology. That has
Okay.
not changed.
All right. Mike?
I was just wondering, Scott, the PRB, if all the septic systems wind up being enhanced INAs around that area, will that still give us a type of threshold we need for percent reduction? Or would it be necessary if we were to implement upgrades or something on the septic systems? Or if we were to go in some way to, you know, a cluster collection system in the central district? You know, I get a little bit concerned about spending money twice on these types of things.
Yes. Excellent question. So, first of all, as I think we mentioned at the last meeting, GHD is under contract to look at some sewering areas as backup plans to this plan that I'm presenting tonight. And this would be one of the watersheds, as you're correctly pointing out, downtown area would be an option. So that would be an option depending on what GHG comes up with for costs to come downtown area. But to try to get some performance numbers and cost numbers to then compare that to the other options. And as I gather from another part of your question, if the PRB looks like it's going to be cost effective and effective at removing the nitrogen to the right level, the enhanced IA upgrades would best be done elsewhere outside of that contributing area to the PRB. And maybe I should point that out. This the red line that goes along the road there it would be the approximate location of the PRB, and then the blue shaded area would be the presumed contributing area where groundwater would flow to that. So I don't know if that completely addresses your question or not, but.
If I might, Mr. Chair, just to add on to that. So the other way to think about it too is that the PRB groundwater is already heavily nutrified. So even if you do upstream treatment, whether it's a centralized collection and treatment, whether it's enhanced IA, it's going to take about 20 to 30 years for that water to migrate to the estuary. So it's already nutrified in the ground. And the PRB lifetimes are typically around 10 years or so. So there's a way to work it so that if you have enhanced treatment upstream, you may not replenish the PRB after say year 10 or 15, so that you don't continue to invest in something that you don't need to, Mike. So that's another way to look at it.
Okay.
Go ahead, sorry.
Scott, so the area of the PRB is proposed here. All of the flow times there are under 10 years. Is that correct?
I think in this case, that's correct. Yep.
Yeah. So, yeah, the area that is longer than 10 years is past Route 6, closer to the ponds for Duck Creek. So, John?
Yeah, question through you to Scott regarding the fertilizer component of this. Is this predicated on the town banning the use of nitrate-based fertilizers?
No, in this case, it would not be. There was actually a deadline by which the town could adopt such a bylaw that they did not do. So this would have to be more of a voluntary public education program. I'm also adding a section about the possibility, because the town has many of those wells could be used, in fact, probably are being used in some cases for what we refer to as fertigation. meaning by essentially irrigating the lawn. If they're in areas where there are elevated nitrates, there would be a benefit to providing water on the lawns, and I've begun to do some calculations on that to see if we can satisfy this relatively small number. But it would have to be, for Wellfleet, it would have to be more of a voluntary program than a regulatory program.
Okay.
Okay, and to be clear, that it wasn't adopted because the wastewater committee advised against it at that time when the window was open. So, okay. I do have a concern with the, so the 95 Lawrence Road project is outside of the PRB's contributing area. But the overall flow volumes for that is pretty high because of the school and the, the town buildings, as well as the neighboring neighborhood. So if how many or what percentage of the system or overall flow that remains after the 95 Lawrence Road would have to be upgraded to enhanced IAs?
Ryan, I'm not completely clear on your question. You asking the flow of 95 Lawrence relative to the flow of all the other systems in the watershed?
So obviously the systems that are connected to the 95 Lawrence Road are not going to be enhanced alternative systems.
Yes.
So out of the remaining load, how much, because it is a pretty high number for the 95 Lawrence Road, how much is the remaining contributing load besides 95 Lawrence Road?
I can't tell you that exact number, but I can certainly get that for you.
Okay.
I think there's about 20 some odd homes that are proposed for be connected to the 95 Lawrence project. So, and I should mention, all of the dots you're seeing on this map, this base map here comes from the Cape Cod Commission's MVP tool. So each one of these dots represents a septic system location, or it's really a centroid to the parcel, but an approximate location. So you can kind of get an idea looking at the number of systems that are outside of that contributing area to Lawrence Road versus Lawrence Road. And the Lawrence Road collection system would be a pretty small percentage of the total in the watershed. I don't know the exact.
Yeah, I mean, to get the load reduction that it gets, it's actually a significant portion of the overall load. I mean, the dots, unfortunately, are not totally accurate for that area, because we all know the school is a 10,000 gallon per day system, and the police station or the fire station is about 1,000, and same with the other one as well. So, okay, are there any other questions on this, on Duck Creek? Okay, so my only comment other than that is that in areas like in downtown, it would make a lot of sense to have some sort of centralized or cluster-based system, because in addition to having a large amount of load within a relatively small area, we also still continue to have drinking wells in close proximity to septic systems. And it is an area that, we should, it's the village core of Wellfleet. So that's all on that.
And as I mentioned, that plan is underway.
Yep. Okay.
I guess we can go to the next slide, Kurt. Thank you. So this is the Cove, which is the next sub watershed, just to the south of of Duck Creek. And the highlighted, everything else is the same I mentioned in terms of categories, but the highlighted projects here include the Mayo Creek restoration. And this is another potential location of a PRB. And per kind of the adaptive management approach here, if the PRB pilot at Commercial Street looks very good, this and cost effective, this might be a place to put a second one. If it's not as cost effective, then instead of putting that PRB, the town could opt for additional shed. The range of the number or the percentage of the load, more correctly stated, would be roughly 40 to 60% of the existing systems. So there'd be quite a few in this subwatershed that would need to be upgraded. But again, that range of the 39 to 58% is based upon the range of performance between 5 milligrams per liter and 11.
Okay. I think the amount of reduction being achieved by shellfish is higher than what is practicable.
Okay, I can comment. Go ahead, sorry.
So how many pieces is that, let's say?
So what I've done for the shellfish estimates at this point, again, working with Nancy Chavetta, she's been providing me landings data townwide. And we've used the Cape Cod Commission's technology matrix to convert those landings to nitrogen removal. And currently, that is the only nitrogen benefit that DEP will consider, I think, providing as a credit to the town. So that's what we're using. And what I've done is I've looked at the last 16 years of landings. There is a increased landings in terms of nitrogen. I've taken that net increase and I've projected that over this 30-year period. Now, the way I've distributed to sub-embayments is based upon current open areas and estimated percentages. But Nancy has requested data, more specific data from each embayment from the state Division of Marine Fisheries, and we're expecting to get that around Thanksgiving. And so these numbers are going to be edited based upon the specific data for each embayment. So currently, this is just a best estimate in terms of, because currently, but we will soon.
Okay, so
that number will get edited.
You use 0.13 grams per piece. Is that correct?
I think that's right. Yep.
Okay, so
For
converting
oysters.
that out, you'd have to harvest over 4 million pieces, additional pieces within Duck Creek, or not Duck Creek, the Cove. And I don't really think that it's feasible to harvest an additional 4 million pieces in the Cove over the production that's already there. I mean, it's already an extremely productive area. We all know, but are there any comments on the Cove?
Well, if that number's accurate, 4 million,
Yep.
then that's highly unlikely.
Yep.
The whole town produces about 10 million. Wild and farm raised, predominantly farm raised. I don't see how you get 4 million out of there.
Does, with tidal flow, does the shell fishing around Indian Neck, not just Chipman's Cove, and does that have any effect on the water quality going around? Do you know what I mean, Scott?
Scott?
I'm not sure I do understand your
So,
question.
so Chipman's
Um,
Cove, Chipman's
could you
Cove
state it?
and Duck Creek are all part of that inner system. And then if you go
Yes.
outside the harbor and there's a
Yep.
lot of shellfish out there, does that have any effect on,
I see what
um,
you're saying.
yeah, Mayo
Yeah.
Creek or, yeah,
So the way the MEP model is set up, it looks at these exchanges, title exchanges between all of these individual embayments. And it takes that into account. However, the reductions that are specified in the MEP report are per each embayment. So the way we interpret that is to meet the overall goals, you need to meet the reduction in each sub-embayment individually. But technically, you're correct that these are all interconnected, so there are benefits back and forth. But that has already been taken into account in the way the MEP model was built. So
Okay.
in other words, we can't take extra credit for a project outside of the embayment because we have to meet that standard there as well.
thank you.
Okay,
And I don't know the number of oysters here specifically. I can get back to you, Ryan, with that later.
Nancy has her hand up.
yeah,
Ryan.
I was gonna call on Nancy. So Nancy,
Hi. Well, first of all, I just want to repeat what Scott said, is that we're going to have better information when we hear back from the state. We are going to get all of the data from the past, hopefully, 18 years by CCB. So this is CCB 13 that we're looking at. And the other thing is that it's not just Chipman's Cove, it's also Duck Creek up until the railroad bridge, which is basically the only place that significant landings come from. There's very little harvested beyond the railroad bridge. So even though we call that area Duck Creek here in this plan, it's part of the cove. So you just factor that in when you look at that 18% and know that we are getting the actual data by sub-embayment from DMF. And therefore, that should help inform this a little bit more accurately. And just one other thing is that the 10 million oysters are farm-raised oysters. That's not including wild. And we are #1 in the state for wild oyster landing. So I'm not going to dispute the 4 million because I don't know at all. But I just want to kind of put things in context.
yeah, that's what it converts out to, is 4 million within this sub-embayment, which is really high. But
Yeah.
John's had his hand up, so, and then I'll go to you, Kurt.
Okay, actually, maybe call on Kurt first. He
Okay.
might answer my
Kurt?
question.
Yeah, so during the couple of years that we did the oyster restoration project on the point, we went from roughly a couple of thousand animals to 4 to 6 million with 2 acres of culch. So that was all heavily vetted data. So again, Nancy and Scott are working on refining the numbers. I think other people have added some nuance to, how that might be achievable in this area. But just as an example, we did go to 4 to 6 million just on a 2-acre area.
How many acres is Chipman? Does anyone know?
Mike?
4 million in perpetuity is a lot different than having an off year where there's 4 million oysters on something with mortality rates. I mean, a consistent 4 million oysters on a 2-acre area, that spot on the inside of the harbor has died back several times to nothing. So the idea that you can just have a self-perpetuating 4 million oysters in one area on top of what's already out there, I think it's pretty challenging. And then I don't know how it calculates. Do these have to go to market or to get counted, or how do they tabulate this?
It's based upon harvest.
Yep.
And the other thing I do want to point out, these numbers are projections for the year 2052, 30 years from now. So this assumes 30 years of growth at the existing, or excuse me, the historical rate. No increase in growth, but no increase in growth beyond the growth rate that we're already seeing over the past, I think it's 16 years. This is data that Nancy's provided me so far. So I just want to keep that in mind. It is 30 years out.
Nancy, through you, Ryan.
Yep, Nancy.
Do you know how many wild oysters are harvested in Wellfleet per year?
Hi. I don't, I can try and request that data. It's very, very difficult right now to get any data for the past 2 years out of DMF because they're dealing with CARES Act distribution of relief. But that's why it's taking until Thanksgiving to get the data that Scott and I want. So I just want to, Scott made a very good clarification here about this being just assuming the growth that we have seen in this town over the past 16 years and projecting that forward. That's all this number is. And then number two, I really am curious myself to see what the data by embayment is. And so again, these are kind of placeholders right now, and I'm not advocating one way or another, but I think that we should expect that shellfish will be some sort of contributing factor here because it is a primary harvesting ground, especially, you know, in the winter months, obviously. And I look forward to seeing the data from DMF so that we can be a little bit more specific here.
Okay. Are there any other questions on this one? Okay, so can we move on?
Okay, Herring River. All I'm pointing out here on the map is, and I think everybody well knows this, the transfer station is on here as a potential wastewater treatment facility location. If in fact it does go there, there will needs to be some offsets because we'll be, even at a treated level, we'll be adding nitrogen to that watershed. And then I'm identifying Herring River restoration as a project that everybody knows the town has heavily invested in. Although I'm not trying to project any nitrogen reduction at this point, but I just show it as a question mark because I think it's highly likely there will be a benefit here. Now, Herring River requires only a 13% reduction. This is one of the
I think we got some more
easier
bandwidth issues here
ones to meet. So therefore, as you can see in the bottom bullet here, somewhere between 3%. Oh gosh. Sorry.
Yeah, no
Can you hear me
worries.
now?
Yep.
John?
Yeah.
Hello.
Yep.
Yeah, it comes and
Okay,
goes.
my apologies. Yeah. So I was just saying that it's an easier one to meet, only a 13% reduction. Therefore, the percent of number of systems, or again, more correctly stated, load, would be only 3 to 14% of the existing systems. And everything else, I think, is the same explanation as previously, but of course, the numbers change in each watershed.
Okay. Are there any questions on the Herring River?
Yeah, I do have one. It's more to do with the prospect of a treatment plant than specifically with the Herring River. But is my understanding correct about a treatment plant that the effluent that comes from it will contain nitrates?
Yeah, best estimate that the effluent would be somewhere between 3 and 5 milligrams per liter.
So it
So
will
there would be
abate the
some, but it
nitrates
would
to
be
some
a
extent.
substantial reduction certainly over Title V.
Oh, okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, and if there is, you know, a treatment plant in a watershed or that would add load, it would have to be offset by connections in that watershed to some form of treatment. So,
That's right.
Is the effluent treatable with with IA type equipment?
Well, the treatment plant would be a different technology than the IAs. It would be a conventional wastewater treatment plant. And again, they are able to achieve effluent concentrations in that range I mentioned, but it's a different technology, John.
Well, I understand, but I mean, the ultimate output from it, which would still contain some nitrates, could that be piped through?
Oh, you mean additional treatment beyond the treatment plant?
Yeah.
It is possible. In fact, the 208 plan does identify that as another option, but I'm not sure that it would be necessary if you went that route, given the thresholds you need to meet.
I see. Okay.
okay, Brian Dudley.
I think there would be extreme diminishing returns on that because treatment is most effective when you have a concentration gradient going from high concentration and getting down to low concentration. That's where you gain efficiency. If you start with a very low concentration, you're not going to gain as much efficiency. So I think I don't think that there would be much advantage in repiping back to individual IA systems once you have it treated at either a centralized or a neighborhood treatment plant.
No, I wasn't referring to individual IA. I was just saying an IA on the output of the treatment plant to further reduce.
Well,
I see your point.
Yeah, I mean it would that would all be taken into account in the design of the treatment system. I mean, basically, you're looking at a nitrifying, denitrifying chain, and that can be accomplished in any number of ways. But I think boiled down to their essentials, you're talking about a biological process, regardless of whether or not you're dealing with, an IA system or a more conventional treatment plant. It's manipulation of microbes, essentially, and that's the common thread.
I see. Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. Any other questions on Herring River? All right, this is one area that I could also see shellfish production increasing. It is one of the, in the Herring River restoration should increase the area that is suitable for shellfish as well. So. Okay, that's it for me.
Okay, Drummer Cove, Blackfish Creek. Haven't pointed out any specific areas here, but again, I'm providing 47% reduction required here in the year 2052. Again, sorry for that typo. In this watershed, it looks like if you were to use the IAs, which is the principal technology here, that you'd need somewhere between 42 and 66% conversions of existing to meet the thresholds. And that again assumes shellfish and minor contributions from the fertilizer stormwater.
Okay, I do have one thing, and that's this area. There are a number of low-lying properties. So in those situations, I correct me if I'm wrong, they would need probably a mound system. Would that be correct?
Yeah, I mean, you need to meet the minimum vertical separation distances. So in fact, one of the things that I was speaking with, I think, I don't know if Anastasia is still on the call here
Nope.
yesterday, the other day, is sea level rise and looking at some of these areas. And she and I have agreed that that's one of the things we want to take a look at going forward. So, but you're right, that will be, if there's room to do that, Ryan, there are limitations as to how far you can mount a system. But certainly that is an option and one that's been used quite a bit in certain areas.
Okay, John.
We tend to look at.
I'm not familiar with the term mound systems.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Scott.
Okay, thank you. So basically what happens, John, is literally bring fill in on the lot and raise part of the septic system leach field up above the natural grade, although the Title V does require that there be so-called naturally occurring pervious material below the system. So there is a limit as to how far the system can be raised. But in some cases, we do see them raised by, let's say, a couple of feet to accommodate depth of water issues.
Does that involve pumping from the tank up to the leach field? Through you to Scott.
Yeah,
It could, John. I don't know if you can hear us.
yeah.
I can hear.
It could.
I can hear.
Yeah, I was curious as to whether in a mound system, does that then require pumping from the septic tank up to the leach field or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it does.
Okay. John, do you have any other questions?
No.
Okay. All right. Can we move on?
Okay, Logie Bay, nothing in particular pointed out here as special locations, but again, according to my range of sensitivity analysis, between 33%, 50 forms or load would need to be upgraded. In this case, there is shellfish part of this plan. And again, this has just been distributed across the abatements based upon size at this.
Okay, your connection keeps going in and out on us, Scott. just
My,
so
my
you're aware.
apologies. I lost my wireless
Yep.
with the storm this past week, and I'm running through my phone here, which is why it's so normal. Yet won't have this problem. My apologies. Any questions?
Are there any questions on this one? On Logie Bay? I would just say that this is another area that I'm not 100% sure how much more shellfish it can support. So, but that's it. Yep.
I'll just ask a question, what the total number of shellfish that the plan is actually calling for in total in these different areas?
Yeah. I don't know that number. I can certainly get it to you. Is landings in terms of and converted that to nitrogen reduction using the technology matrix. So we can convert that to individuals, Mr. DeVasto, if that's what you're asking for, but I don't have that number.
And this is assuming harvested product, yeah?
Correct.
That's the only way to get credit for it?
Yes, that's right. I think from a scientific standpoint, there's good evidence that there is additional nitrogen removal that is occurring. I don't believe there are too many people opposing that in the scientific world, but it's very hard to calculate it.
Yeah.
So the decision has been made, part of 208, to be conservative and only allow credit for the actual harvest.
Okay, so this would convert out to be a little bit over 2 million based on harvest.
And I should also mention, this is a combination of clams and oysters. So the numbers, I think, are a little different in terms of number of individuals, but you're probably not too far off as an estimate.
Okay, Nancy?
Hi. The other thing just to remember is that this is both wild and farmed. So what Scott has done is taken the trajectory of the last 16 years, noticed that it has been an increase of 0.92%, right? Something like that, Scott?
92 kilograms per year.
92 kilograms per year. Sorry, 92 kilograms per year. And he has projected that forward. So this is all shellfish, not just wild, but farmed and wild landings as reported by the state to us in aggregate for the town of Wellfleet for the past 16 years. So this is just taking that number and projecting it forward. And honestly, kind of, I'm not sure exactly how the calculations per sub-embayment were arrived to, but as I said, we will get more fine-tuned on that as soon as we get the data for those last 16 years by sub-embayment from DMF. But so this is for actual, this has been projected forward just based on the very small incremental growth that this town has had, even though when you look at the data, quahog landings have gone down, oyster landings have gone up. And this is just a combination of that added together and then projected forward. It's not, there's nothing new happening here except for projecting forward the trend that has become evident in the last 16 years. And we will certainly refine that as we move forward. And we might estimate in some areas, and we might have underestimated in other areas, because the way that the sub-embayment map doesn't exactly match up. So I bet we'll get more removals from, CCB 11, for example, which is the main harbor, than we'll get from CCB 14, obviously. But because they don't exactly match, some areas are going to fare a little better in the long run.
Okay, so approximately how much of Wellfleet's landings are wild and how much are from grants?
I'd have to look at the spreadsheet to see, but obviously, the aquaculture product is heads and shoulders above wild product, but still we're the #1 wild oyster and blood clams, which are not going to be factored in here, and bay scallops. We're not #1 for bay scallops, but we're #1 for blood clams and oysters for wild production in the state.
Yeah,
but I can't give you exact numbers until I look at the spreadsheet.
So over the last 10 years, the actual production that's happened in the wild has been decreasing as an overall.
However, okay, and then for the past 4 years, which we only have 2 of the past, so we have through 2018, so we don't have any data basically since my first year here. And we have been doing exponentially more propagation than we had in the past, and we haven't had ice for the past few years. So I wouldn't be surprised if you saw some higher landings in these past few years, but we don't have those yet. And then, as you know, 1 year doesn't define a trend. And so some years we're going to have down years and up years, but overall, over the course of the past 16 years, it's pretty conservative to just say, if we continue 92 kilograms of nitrogen removal, we're on this current track.
Yeah.
This is just that 6 years of data averaged out and put as a trend.
So I don't know how much more intensity of use we can realistically expect out of the pre-existing grants. I mean, some of them definitely can be used to a higher degree. But to expect that production's always going to rise based on the current licensed acreage, I don't know. I don't see how it can't rise forever.
It's just very small. It's 92 kilograms a year. It's like nothing. It is a small but incremental increase year over year for the past 16 years. I don't see why it wouldn't pretty much, it's such a drop in the bucket. Why wouldn't it just continue like that, you know, given everything that's going on? And
Yeah, I just
not
don't
that we're
see.
not gonna have, I'm not saying that we're not gonna have a down year or two, but it's, you know, overall, the trend has been increasing ever so slightly. And we're not adding in anything extra. We're just basing the future on the past.
Yeah, I just don't see additional 2 million pieces coming out of Logie Bay.
And no, it might not. You're absolutely right. I'm not saying that it's going to.
Okay.
You know, we need to get those
And again,
CMF to understand where the opportunities are.
yeah. The other thing I would just remind the discussion is we are obviously talking a lot of adaptive management here, and I fully recognize that it's really hard to plan exactly what the harvest is going to be in the year 2052. As Nancy mentioned, I'm just basing that growth for our options within each one of these watersheds, for example, to adjust the number of IA upgrades. In this case, we're
Well, I can tell you, if we don't do something about housing, there's not gonna be anybody to harvest those oysters. 2052.
Don't change the subject.
Sorry.
looking
So I just looked at some data in my spreadsheets, and what I'm
in a
having
third
right
and a
now is
half.
guidance.
Are you losing me again?
Yep.
I'm sorry.
We did, you just
I'm-
came back.
I'm sorry. I was just pointing out adaptive management here, meaning if the shellfish numbers are lower, the INAs might be higher, or vice versa. We might find out that they are actually filtering and denitrifying, and the water quality is better than we expected. So we may need less IAs. So the adaptive management part of this is something that I think really is an important component, something we're not used to doing. This is a new way of looking at this problem, I think. And I think there's some flexibility in here.
Also, I just want to say, like, I am not looking at shellfish as the end all be all at all for this. Like, you know, Johnny and I have been pushing back pretty strongly that we don't feel that, you know, shellfish is going to be the savior of our nitrogen problems in Wellfleet. But I feel that given the type of extractive harbor that we are, and that extraction is a priority for us, and that we really value our harvests, and we value the people who can make their living on the water, both in farms and in the wild. And so I think that value can be translated into being incorporated for what it provides. I'm not saying that we need to increase it or anything at all, but I think that given who we are as a town, we should incorporate it in there and get what we can out of the fact that we're the #1 town in the state for shellfish landings. We have a place in this plan. Doesn't have to be a big one, but we deserve a spot in here given what we do.
Okay. So Can we go to the next one?
Okay, so this is Hatches Creek, which is actually divided into two areas according to the MEP delineations in the southern part of the town. And this requires only a 15% reduction, so somewhat similar to Herring River. As you can see, the numbers here are quite a bit smaller in terms of numbers of upgrades needed. And part of this does go into the town of Eastham. So there may be some opportunity to have them participate in this program to a small degree.
These are actually two different areas, the Hatches Creek and Freshbrook.
Right, but the way that they're identified in terms of nitrogen load, they put them together.
No, they didn't. They have Freshbrook broken out separately in the MEP report.
All right, well, we can take a look at that, Ryan. My impression is that they are broken out separately, but I believe these load numbers are together. But I'll revisit that with you.
Okay. I'm going to make the same comment on shellfish. And this is primarily because there's really no open water within that area. There's a small bit of open water, but most of it's high marsh where there is water. That's all from me. Any others? Okay. Can we move on?
I think there's just one more. So this is Wellfleet Harbor, but it really addresses the contributing areas to Wellfleet Harbor that we haven't already addressed, because relative to what we were talking about earlier, all of the system ties together, meaning reductions in some of these other embayments we've already talked about will obviously affect Wellfleet Harbor as a whole. But the load numbers here in the MEP report are indicated as separate numbers. So overall, the load requirement reduction is 57%. Here, again, this is I put the largest allocation of the growth of shellfish here, just strictly because of the vast area. And you can see, there is a little bit of a credit for an upgrade of a wastewater system at Harborside that I included, which was right after the 2010 analysis for MEP report. And the range of septics here was for existing septic upgrades, 4 to 13%. And again, that could be traded off with less shellfish production and more IAs.
Okay. Are there any comments at this point? Are we all ready? Mike?
This is good.
Mike, you're muted.
So this is the overall plan we're looking at here, the whole harbor abatement?
No, this is just
Just
the
what-
har- yeah, not including the sub embayments that we just talked about.
Okay, this is the harbor, not including the sub-abatement. Okay.
Yes.
Wasn't sure if this was the whole calculation. I didn't look closely enough at it. Okay. Thank you. I just wanted to be clear on that.
Ryan?
Yep, go ahead, Kurt.
Yeah, just one quick thing. I think one of the things that I think is the value of the exercise was basically to see that a relatively small number of existing septics need to be upgraded. I'm equally uncomfortable with the emphasis on shellfish. Clearly, the number of septics that need to be upgraded is relatively low, and to the extent that those get driven up, that's going to take pressure off of what ordinarily is growing within the town of Wellfleet's shellfish harvest. And there may be other things that we haven't identified, but I think the main point is there's a heck of a lot of upside and a heck of a lot of extra capacity within just upgrading septic systems to easily meet the target thresholds in each of these embayments.
Okay. Is there any other slides, Scott, or is that it? For
No,
tonight?
that's it. That's it, Ryan.
Okay. All right, so, okay, I would like to adjourn, if that's okay with
Move to
everybody.
adjourn.
No, I'm wide awake.
Yeah. So I move to adjourn.
Second,
Okay, roll call vote.
Janet, I.
John, I.
Ryan, I.
Michael, I.
Okay.
I
Good night,
thank
all.
everyone, Scott, Rebecca for doing a great job staying up this late, Brian Dudley, Brian Baumgarten. I mean, it's great. This has really been great for me to learn all this again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Enjoy your retirement.
Not yet.